why this? So when this was suggested, this came out of the Youth Advisory Group, which is a number of young people to reflect these sides. Yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, I have no idea where that sound is coming from, but something is echoing. That's not great. 1 second. Okay, maybe that's better now. So yeah, why this? I think this was really important to us when we developed it in the Youth Advisory Group, because it allowed for something to be addressed, actually, that myself and Rebecca, when we did the short stream, came to light, that we talk about a lot of people of color in Ireland and around the world, and a lot of underrepresented groups gaining notability, maybe posthumously, maybe like 30 years after they have created their works of note, because that is how long it takes for them to gain notability on par with the standards that platforms like Wikipedia require. But while that is something that needs to be acknowledged, and that's something that Rebecca will talk about far better than I when she introduces you to the structure of Wikipedia and how their criteria work, I noted in myself, knowing, for example, a lot of Wiki Women in Red, having been one for 2 years now, that it's not that citations don't exist, and it's not that objective citations don't exist for people of color, it's that they are genuinely overlooked. When we talk about being invisible, like, there are people who will look at articles and literally forget that there were people of color in, citations and notability, in awards, whatever, you name it. And I suppose this was a great platform to actually be able to bring together some of those thoughts I had, bring together the skills of Rebecca and Alice as people who have been working and editing Wikipedia like relentlessly for so long, and bring those conversations out into the open, make them visible, and have discussions with all of you about how we can address them and why it is so important to address people contemporaneously. Like, one of the ills we've seen at the moment with discussions of Black Lives Matter arising as relevant to Ireland is when you have, far-right groups, or even people who would consider themselves, center, right of center. Whenever discussions on racism are had, you'll very often see the name Phil Lynott popping into conversation. No harm to him, great fella, I'm sure, excellent musician. But it's so startling then that, we now have Irish creatives who are at least like twice in the last year being profiled by Vogue. We have Irish creatives who've graced London Fashion Week and been designed for. We have Irish creatives and scientists doing incredible things in Ireland and outside. But we never talk about those people as people of color, of merit and talent in Ireland, when we have contemporaneous conversations about how those people are affected and discriminated against and barred from reaching a profile. So it's really important to sometimes bring these conversations up to date. And often, if people open a page of notable Black people in Ireland and only see Phil Lynott, then that's the person that's going to stick in their minds. So I guess, yeah, all of that is to say that I felt this was really important, and something that came out of the Youth Advisory Group in terms of addressing people of color in Ireland, their contributions, and equally like disabled and migrant and traveler groups, anybody who's underrepresented, like addressing their notability now, seeing what we can do to help them now, see what we can do to help them, their struggles, their work be seen on a par now, because it is happening. It's happening every day. They're doing the work every day, and they're doing far more just to be noticed as equals. It's just about bringing that up. Why us? Well, because who else is motivated to click on an Eventbrite link for an event that's going to run for 4 hours, knowing that you'll have to listen to us, and you might have to actually sit down and like do a lot of finicky bits of editing? Why us? Because we're actually people who are motivated enough to be here. We're fortunate to have a platform that is putting their principles into practice, something that came out of when we were having a lot of conversations around the Science Gallery reboot was matching principles with practice, matching the ideas of inclusion with the implementation of it. And here we are. Here is a group of motivated people, a group of people with the right skills and the right direction and the right talent to start doing small bits, start really small, start editing stubs, start like adding a birth date or a death date somewhere. But we have a group of people who are giving up their time because you want to learn. And there's no better group of people to actually affect the change than those who have the right intention to do it to start with. And so why us? Because you chose to be here. So enjoy the next few hours. And then what next? So like that whole thing was why this project kind of came together and what the intentions of it are. What next will hopefully be Rebecca and Alice talking for a while. And what's next will be a little bit of an explanation about what Wikipedia is, how it works, how you have to kind of know the rules to break them a little, and how they absolutely need to be broken a little, because people think that rules are things to be followed, but rules have very often been a little bit more than that and been a little bit more like the glass ceilings we like to talk about. So sometimes you need to really know what needs to be done to break them. So that'll be what will be next. Rebecca and Alice giving you a little bit of an introduction to Wikipedia, and hopefully their words will provide you with a little bit of direction, and their skills that they demonstrate will provide you with a little bit of valuable instruction, so that ultimately the purpose of this whole thing is achieved, and it can let you make people who are like you feel a little bit more of consequence, feel a little bit more of the tangible impact their work is making in the world. And it can let you make the people you look up to feel a little bit less invisible. Hope you enjoy.
Thank you very much for that, Shubhangi. That was a fantastic intro. So without further ado, won't make people hang around unduly too much. I am going to share my screen. Now, so as mentioned, my name is Rebecca O'Neill. I am the project coordinator of Wikimedia Community Ireland, which is this little group down here, and we'll explore a little bit about what that means in a second. And I'm joined by Alice White, who is the Wikimedian residence of the Wellcome Trust in the UK. So this is my, sorry, earphones already annoying me 5 seconds into the presentation. It's always a good sign. So introduction to Wikipedia. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a quick rundown of, I suppose, fundamentally what is Wikipedia, what it is attempting to do, and perhaps some of the, as already alluded to, some of the pitfalls and issues that it can face as regards representation and content, and the knowledge gaps that are known to exist within Wikipedia. Just, I suppose, a brief kind of note on this is that broadly I will be referring to English language Wikipedia. It is not the only Wikipedia, but the things I'm going to be talking about regarding, I suppose, kind of community conventions and things like that, some of them are universal, and some of them are quite specific to English language, and we can discuss that if that's of interest to the participants today. When we're thinking about, I suppose, how things get included on Wikipedia and why, it's instructive to think about fundamentally what is Wikipedia, what it is and what it is attempting to do. And it is a free web-based collaborative and multilingual encyclopedia. So there isn't just the English language version of it. The idea of it being free was very much baked in from the beginning, in that it, let's check on the chat for a second, make sure we're okay. Doesn't want to show up for me. Is that it was kind of, in the early days of Wikipedia, there was a concern that, you know, it was quite an experiment in around 2001, and the idea that perhaps if, before it became established as a charity, that it could be taken away and paywalled and things like that. So it's now part of, I suppose, the fundamentals of Wikipedia, that it will always be free and it will always be web-based. Web-based is quite important in that it's not concerned with being a physical encyclopedia in the same way that Encyclopedia Britannica and other ones were. So it's not constrained by a physical form. It can be as large or as small as the community decides it to be. Collaborative is obviously in the way that it is written and compiled. No one thing is written by one author. And then the multilingual element is that it works across languages. It is editable by everyone, and obviously with the massive caveat of everyone that has an internet connection, which is not everybody in the world, even a stable internet connection, and it's not even everybody on the island of Ireland that has access to stable internet. So there's quite a big asterisk on that. So when we're talking about some of the gaps in knowledge and some of the paucity of representation, this is definitely a factor in it, because who has had long-term access to the internet? Who has access to these resources? And they are the people who are going to shape sites like Wikipedia. Everything you see is written collaboratively. Now, there is a little bit of what we could call, I suppose, a long tail with this. Some articles, on prominent politicians, musicians, things like that will have hundreds, if not thousands of editors will have edited that article over time. Things that are more niche will only perhaps have 10 authors or 10 editors that have contributed to it. So there is kind of the more niche the topic, the less, I suppose, volume of people you're going to have both looking at the content and editing it. But nothing you read on Wikipedia will have one author, or it won't have one author for very long, basically. Everything that you see within the Wikiverse that is controlled by or funded by the Wikimedia Foundation, which is a charity behind Wikipedia. So usually it's around November, December, you'll generally get the, please donate the cost of a cup of coffee or something like that towards Wikipedia. And all of that money goes to the Wikimedia Foundation, which is in San Francisco. First of all, the funds go towards keeping the site up, keeping the servers going, technical staff, everything that's needed to keep a website of this size going, along with the other sister projects. Then it goes to the foundation staff, and then ultimately it'll go to groups like ours in Ireland, the Wikimedia Community Ireland. We are what's referred to as the recognised affiliate in Ireland of the Wikimedia Foundation. We are allowed to represent the foundation here, and we apply each year for annual funding to do the work that we're doing, like today's workshop. So that's one of the differences between the P and the M. The P is obviously Wikipedia, which is the site that everybody accesses, which is the M is Wikimedia, which is I suppose the infrastructure and the sister projects behind the site that you see. So how does it work ultimately? The first sentence is a little bit of a mouthful: an aggregator of open license resources. Or what in God's name could that mean? I suppose what this means is that first and foremost, and it's slightly a philosophical thing, and it's slightly also ease of access, is that Wikimedians and Wikipedians will always reach towards similarly open license resources to Wikipedia. So Wikipedia is released under this Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike license. So it will lean, and Wikimedia editors individually will lean towards open source resources to add to Wikipedia. So things that are in the public domain, books that are readily accessible under Creative Commons licenses, but equally images, sound files, media generally. So I suppose it's philosophical in that Wikipedians have this kind of philosophy of wanting things to be open and shareable, so they will go to those kind of resources first, but equally they tend to be the sources that are easiest to find. So you don't have to have an institutional login or find paywall material, that kind of thing, so they will reach to those first. Everything you see is peer-reviewed. And again, if we think about this long tail, things that are quite high profile will get hundreds, thousands, not hundreds of thousands of eyes on them. So the likes of David Cameron, Theresa May, that kind of thing. There will be a lot of editors watching, scrutinizing, monitoring, editing those articles to ensure that there's no vandalism or disruptive editing, but equally that what is being added to it is not adding undue bias, kind of tipping the scales one way or another as regards objectivity. But there's also peer review as regards the standard of the overall article. So there's kind of there's a sliding scale of assessing the quality of an article, which is done by the community as well. This is quite important to remember for new editors. the previous version, all previous versions of an article are kept. So if you press the publish button and you suddenly have a wild panic that you didn't want to do that, there is a way of reverting back to the previous version of an article. And this works in numerous ways. First of all, Wikipedia is all about transparency. So you want to see how an article has changed over time. So you can monitor how editors are changing things, how things are progressing, how an article is expanding or retracting. You can track, as I said, vandalism or disruptive edits or other forms of ways of trying to disrupt the ecosystem of Wikipedia. But equally, it means that if somebody makes a genuine mistake, we can just revert back to the previous version of an article. No harm, no foul, basically. And this means that whenever you see those quote unquote hilarious news items, which are, such and such as Wikipedia article has been vandalized or hacked, which is a very generous term to use, usually what you'll find is somebody has made a mischievous edit to a Wikipedia article. It's probably lasted minutes, if not seconds, before it's been reverted to the previous version, but somebody's taken a screenshot. So the most recent version of that was the Colson statue that went down in Bristol. Somebody added to his lead section that he had won, I think, the inaugural canal swim diving competition and the date in which the statue had been deposited in the water. So somebody screenshot that. But as I suppose a disruptive edit, it was probably reverted within seconds because there was an awful lot of editors paying attention to that article that day. As I said, everything on Wikipedia is published under this Creative Commons attribution share alike article. What this means is that as a group of editors, we could download 10, 20 articles today on Wikipedia. We could put them in a book, we could publish that book, and we could sell it. But what we would have to do is say, we got the articles from Wikipedia on this particular time date. So we're attributing, we're saying where we got the information from. And we couldn't put a more restrictive license on it. So we couldn't put a more restrictive copyright license on it because it has to be share alike. So it has to be under the same license. So it's iterative in that way. It's literally a way of, it is a form of copyright, but it's a permissive form of copyright in which you are stating openly that you are allowing other people to take the content and adapt it in this way. And this is the mission statement of Wikipedia, of Jimmy Wales, who was the co-founder of the project back in 2001. And there has been a lot of kind of debate and I suppose growth within the Wikimedia community over the past 5 years now about, it's not just about free access to the sum of all human knowledge, that there should be the ability to make demonstrable and worthy edits or changes to that sum of all human knowledge, depending on where you are in the world, that you haven't had that ability up until now, and that we really have to think about what we think of as the sum of all human knowledge. Where is that coming from? What are the biases that are inherent in it and all of the baggage that comes with that? This is a further, and this is a horribly bitmapped image, sorry about that. This is a difference, I suppose, between the M and the P a little bit further, in that you can see Wikipedia is just one of the projects within a wider galaxy of projects that the Wikimedia Foundation fund and support, and that people who perhaps refer to themselves as Wikimedians as opposed to Wikipedians will interact with. So I won't go through every single one of them, but we have, say, Commons here, which is where all media, so images, sound files, videos will live. We also have Wikisource, which is where open source texts will live. We have Wikiquote, which is a crowdsourced dictionary of quotes. We also have Wikispecies and Wikidata. So there is a difference between, I suppose, people who consider themselves Wikipedians who will only write Wikipedia articles or perhaps only interact in their language Wikipedia or a number of language Wikipedias. But then there are people who refer to themselves as Wikimedians, and they will tend to, say, upload photographs, edit OTRSs of open license texts that have been uploaded to Wikisource. They'll add a few quotes. They might do a little bit of taxonomic data. Wikidata is linked data. Wiktionary, they'll add a few definitions, that kind of thing. So they tend to, I suppose, Wikimedians will tend to work across projects. And there's no good, bad, or ill to that. It's just that I suppose there's different, forms of identity within the Wikiverse. This is kind of a little bit of the why bother slide a little bit. It's like, of all the things that you could do with yourself, and we're talking about kind of representation, how people access knowledge. Why Wikipedia? Why would you do this instead of doing, you know, any other kind of, I suppose, good digital citizenship online? It is fundamentally now the largest encyclopedia that has ever been written. English language Wikipedia now has over 6 million articles. About 500 to 600 new articles are created every day. It's available fully within 300 languages. There are some languages which are in what's referred to as incubator, which means that they are, I suppose, they're not ready to hatch. The language Wikipedia is still quite small before they're published and become a fully fledged one. And, you know, this includes most of the mainstream languages that you can think of, but also there will be ones for which digital presence is quite challenging. So some of the huge challenges for smaller language Wikipedias is they may not have an accepted orthography, an accepted written form. So Northern Sami and Berber language in Morocco, they have Wikipedias, but it's quite difficult to actually have the hardware and the software to be able to develop the Wikipedia further. So a lot of the challenges are not just about access to knowledge and the building of that knowledge, but also the physical infrastructure to be able to do that meaningfully. But there is an Irish language Wikipedia, Wikipede. If people are interested in that, we can explore Wikipede a little bit later. So about 500 million people each month will visit Wikipedia, and about 21 billion page views. So it's getting a lot of traffic, whether, you know, depending on where you're coming from, whether you like that or not. It's where people are going to for their information a lot of the time. So what is not included is doing, I suppose, a massive disservice to all the people who are going to it as one of their main knowledge reserves. So who writes Wikipedia? As we said before, everyone can if they have the access to an internet connection and a device that allows editing. You can mobile edit, it's quite challenging. It is far more comfortable, definitely, to edit on a laptop, a Chromebook, a PC, a good old-fashioned PC. There's roughly about 130,000 regular contributors. A regular contributor is somebody who makes at least 5 edits in a month. This metric was come up with in the early years of Wikipedia and has stuck. So when people in the Wikiverse talk about your regular or your I suppose, frequent contributors, that's the rate of contribution that we're looking at. As I've said, some languages like English and Cubano are quite large. Spanish is also quite large, Wikipedia, and strangely enough, Swedish. But the majority of Wikipedias are below about 100,000 articles. So Irish language Wikipedia has about 50,000. So that's kind of the scale. And that ranks in around 88th, 89th in the 300 language Wikipedias. So most language Wikipedias are relatively small in comparison. This is my favorite quote about Wikipedia, that, you know, if it didn't exist and we were to propose that we found it tomorrow, the idea that you would get people from all around the world with differing ideas of verifiability, of what knowledge we should be using, even just grammar constructs, what an article should look like, how it should be laid out, and to get those people to connect with each other over the internet and actually come up with something that works and has worked for 19 years for different definitions of who and when it works for, obviously, you would get laughed out of any room. It's herding cats on the internet and it sounds ridiculous, but for some reason it seems to work in practice. And there's fascinating research into perhaps why, you know, because Wikipedia was not the only crowdsourced encyclopedia that was founded in around this time. One of the more famous ones in this part of the world was H2G2, which is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and why Wikipedia seemed to thrive and others didn't. And there's differing theories about that, but we won't go into that today. That's literally somebody's thesis. So when we're talking about what Wikipedians look like, so I'm in here somewhere. Can I find myself? There I am. I can always find the selfie frame, and there I am. So this is a group of international Wikimedians. This is Wikimania. This is the last one that I attended in 2015. So this is in Mexico. So this is the international conference for Wikipedians and Wikimedians. So people are brought from all around the world to share knowledge and connect with each other, try and overcome common like the ones that I was talking about with kind of minority languages, but equally issues around freedom in their countries when it comes to access to Wikipedia and the ability to actually perhaps have a group like Wikimedia Community Ireland. Not all countries would allow kind of citizen groups like that to coalesce in the way that we do in Ireland and other countries, but also things like copyright reform in their locality, or the ability to, in parts of Europe, you don't have the right to, say, go out and take a photograph of the street. If there's a modern building there, you don't have freedom of panorama, so you can't upload that under a Creative Commons license. So we're not all operating in the same structures. So it's a challenging but also quite a collaborative space. But what you'll notice about this image is that there's probably roughly about 50% women, probably not quite, but trying to get there. And there's huge diversity in people that you're seeing there. So this is people like myself who work within their communities or volunteer within their communities to promote the use of Wikimedia projects, but also other open source projects like OpenStreetMap and open knowledge broadly. But they may not necessarily reflect the people who actually edit the Wikipedia in which they work with. So this is quite old now. You can see it's well over a decade old at this point, but this was a snapshot taken of Wikipedia editors on English language Wikipedia in 2009, which was not quite, but at one of the high points. It was at a higher point of, I suppose, expansion of English language Wikipedia than there is now. The rate of articles being created and expanded would be much, much higher, and the rate of users would be much, much higher at this point. And that's because there was just a lot more to be written and to be contributed to. I suppose a lot more low-hanging fruit at that point. And at the time, the gender divide is pretty much stayed static. Of people who identify their gender on Wikipedia as a user, it's roughly between 15 and 20% of all editors are women. At the time, this was the age demographic. So if you think about people who were setting down the groundwork of what English language Wikipedia looks like now, they were between the ages of 18 and 30. They had at least an undergraduate degree. They had no partner and they had no children. So what these people tended to be was very, very rich in time. And also the ability to access probably resources. If they were in third level education, they would have had institutional access to, say, journals and academic libraries, that kind of thing. But also they would have the skills to be able to access those resources in a meaningful way. So they would be able to, it was a skill that they had been taught, is how to do research, how you find resources. But what you find is this particular demographic, you will find that there's an article on most guns that have ever been created, most ships, trains, planes and automobiles that have ever been commissioned will have an article. But minorities, even historical women will not be written about because in general, they were not of interest to this cohort. And what we found in more recent surveys of editors of Wikipedia is that it's the most regular contributors, the ones that have stuck around, they are this same cohort, so they're 10 years older. And some of them perhaps will have grown in their editing interests and things like that, but then others may have, I suppose, solidified. And that's one of the issues with Wikipedia having been around for so long, is that English language Wikipedia is that it's quite a large, unwieldy, and also quite well-established language community, so it's less adaptable to change. Small language Wikipedias, and Welsh is a really good example of this. It's a small and dynamic group of editors. They're far more likely to take up tools to do kind of automatic translation, to take up things that just make the editing environment far more friendly, whereas English language Wikipedia is quite, in many ways, kind of stuck in its old ways. It kind of grew up. It doesn't like to adopt new tools too readily. It's a little bit more adverse to change. But if there is enough momentum behind something, there can be a paradigm shift. And that's one of the beauties of the Wikiverse. And speaking of this, so everything on Wikipedia, all the things that we talk about as regards all those rules that Shubhangi was referring to, the ideas of notability, of where we get our information from, technically, any of these things can be up for debate at any given time. If there was enough Wikipedia editors felt that we should perhaps change, for example, how we look at self-publishing. In 2001, the idea of self-publishing was very much vanity publishing, that you would pay to self-publish, that kind of thing, whereas the nature of self-publishing has changed in the past 20 years. You know, publishing houses like Unbound, where it's kind of crowdsourced. Do we put them in the same basket as, you know, vanity publishing of the 20th century? So if there was enough momentum behind something, enough editors got behind it, you propose a change, and if there's enough of a paradigm shift, then, you know, the pendulum will swing in that change. But these are the 5 things that I suppose are immutable about Wikipedia, and they're kind of fundamentals of what it always will be. It is an encyclopedia. It's not a textbook. It's not a travel guide. It's none of these things. It is fundamentally an encyclopedia, and will always attempt to be. It's written from a neutral point of view. Now, much like attempting to get to a kind of a philosophical ideal of an objective viewpoint, whether or not anything can be truly neutral is obviously hotly debated. But the idea is that you're striving towards neutrality. And fundamentally, we can explore a little bit more what that means, but it's I suppose it's more of an ultimate goal rather than something that's easily achievable on a day-to-day basis. As I said before, this was kind of solidified quite early on in the history of Wikipedia, that it is free, and it always will be free. It will never go behind a paywall, and that anybody can edit it and distribute it. And this was to mean that, you know, there will be no point at which, you know, a Wikipedia article will be finished. You know, it'll never become static. There'll always be the ability to edit it and to distribute it beyond Wikipedia, and that's quite important. Like all online platforms, especially those that are based in text, interacting with fellow editors at times can be fraught. But that all Wikipedians, we assume good faith first, that everybody is trying their best and, you know, has the best intentions when they're editing Wikipedia, but that you should always interact with them in a respectful and civil manner. And Wikipedia has had its problems with this. It probably does better than an awful lot of online platforms, but it has definitely not had a spotless record in this, as has no online platform. It has suffered, you know, like everyone. And that fundamentally, these are the only rules. So everything else at any point can be up for debate, but these are the only things that are never going to change about it. So what do we mean by all of that? To break it down a little bit further. So the neutral point of view in a day-to-day editing Wikipedia basis, and this is how I suppose it differs from most types of writing that most of us will be somewhat familiar with, is that you're not adding any of your own personal opinion, bias, or speculation. So if you think back to when, you know, you're writing an essay or something like that, generally you would be asked for your synthesis of sources or your conclusions, and that's the exact opposite of what Wikipedia wants. What it wants you to do is go off, and I'm talking about it as if it's this kind of beast, you know, this sentient thing, but what Wikipedians do is they go off, they find their sources, and you report back exactly the information that you're finding there. You rephrase it so that you're not plagiarizing, and then you cite it correctly. And what this means is that somebody else can then check. So we're going on to verifiability there, that somebody else can check that the information that you're reporting is true. So that's why you can't just, and the most likely thing that happens to new editors is you add a new sentence because you know something. You know, this is about my hometown. I know that there's a statue to O'Connell on the main street. But if you add that piece of information and add no citation, it'll probably be deleted because nobody else can double check. You know, they can't double check your brain to make sure that information is correct. So what you need to do is find a source that verifies the piece of information that you're adding. So you find a tour book or, you know, a history of the local town or something like that, and you can add your citation then. This next one is possibly, I mean, all of these things you're probably starting to think about, okay, you're starting to see the stumbling blocks as to why certain people or certain topics don't get onto Wikipedia. Because finding lots of verifiable sources on people, communities, languages, histories that have been systematically and institutionally ignored, finding all of those verifiable sources can be very difficult. So while this creates an ecosystem in which the information can be as robust as possible, it also creates barriers for inclusion at times. And all of these ideas of verifiability and what knowledge we accept is all built on a Western idea of knowledge and a written idea of knowledge. So it does build in biases and problems that way as well. I'm going to keep an eye on the time to make sure I'm not waffling for too long. You don't include original research. And this also kind of goes, I suppose this is why we avoid primary sources on Wikipedia as well, because you are going towards your secondary sources, your newspapers, your RTE, but equally books published by mainstream publishers, journals, that kind of thing. You're not relying on unpublished data or unpublished sources, so you're not going to use an unpublished doctoral thesis as the main source in an article. And it's because the idea of verifiable, reliable sources is that they themselves have gone through some kind of publishing regime, which makes sure that they are reliable inherently themselves. You always assume good faith, so you always presume that other editors are trying their best, like you are. I don't know how relevant this is going to be for today, but you should always avoid conflict of interest. So if you happen to have a famous spouse or parent or sibling or other relative, or you work for somebody who perhaps has a Wikipedia article or should have a Wikipedia article, you probably shouldn't edit it. And that's, again, trying to weed out any sort of bias, because you don't know, especially if you're related to somebody, you're only going to want to add things that make them look good, or perhaps leave out other pieces of information, that kind of thing. And it's just to kind of get away from any of those kind of issues you might have of you being too close to the subject and not being as neutral as possible as you can be. That said, if you work for an institution or volunteer in an organization that you want to write about, you can state that affiliation on your user page, and that kind of circumvents the problems around it. One of the main issues with conflict of interest is if you try and hide it. So it's best, if you really want to edit those pages, just state it clearly, and that gets rid of that problem broadly. So we're now moving into the section where we're going to get some of you to do some work. You're not just going to be listening to me rattle on all evening, I promise. So for those of you who have not created a user account, there's just a few guidelines, and I use these slides often with student groups who quite often like to have a shared account, because then they can just make one of the group do all of the writing, and it makes it look like all of them are doing the writing. But you should never share an account like most online platforms. It should be yours alone. You can edit without logging in. It's referred to as anonymous editing. It's not particularly anonymous in that your IP address is recorded, so you are geolocatable. Also, if you are on a shared IP, so say if you're at your college or something like that, obviously it's not the case at the moment, but in your library, quite often those IPs are locked down for anonymous editing because people have vandalized and done mischievous things from a shared IP. So if you're on, say, your university or your local library, you probably will have to log in to be able to edit. It can be your real name or it can be a pseudonym, like any online platform. Think about like your Twitter handle. You would probably want to avoid certain words. So don't put in bot, B-O-T, or robot, because you may be prompted to change your name because you might be mistaken, because there are bots on Wikipedia who edit Wikipedia, who do kind of quite boring tasks. You'd also, try and keep it obviously safe for work. All of those kind of usernames will tend to get weeded out. And it's because generally the people creating them are not necessarily going to be well-rounded Wikipedians. They're going to have their own agendas. But what you'll find is your first few goes, I think there's millions of registered editors on Wikipedia. And the logins are global. So once you have a login for English language Wikipedia, you can log into all of those Wikimedia projects, but equally all of the 300 language Wikipedias. So if you think about all those people creating usernames, an awful lot of the first few goes would probably be taken. Why have a Wikipedia account if you can just edit anonymously? It's like having an account on anything. It's like having your karma on Reddit or your amount of tweets on Twitter. You're building a record of your interactions on Wikipedia. So you're building credibility. Because everything is transparent on Wikipedia. Somebody can go to your user page and see all of the edits that you've made. So if they suspect that perhaps you do have a conflict of interest, or you're pretending to be somebody that you're not, meat puppeting, or you're sock puppeting, you're pretending to be, you have multiple accounts and you're using that to sway conversation on some of those paradigm shifts that we were talking about. User accounts do get monitored for that kind of, I suppose, nefarious behavior. So you're kind of showing that good faith, basically, by saying this is my body of edits and this is what I'm interested in editing. It also means that other editors are more likely to kind of reach out to you to look for either to help you if you're a very new editor and if they think that you might be struggling a little bit, but equally if they notice that you have access to history books on a particular topic. I had somebody ping me not too long ago about a historical tennis figure from Ireland because I had been writing about historical tennis ladies. And he said, do you have any sources on this woman? I didn't, but I now have her down as kind of somebody to look for. So it means that you can kind of get that collaboration going as well. As you edit Wikipedia as a brand new editor, there's certain things you can't do. So until you've built up a few edits, you can't create an article straight away. There are certain other forms of editing ability. There's ways of locking down articles. So unless you as an editor have been around for a certain amount of time and done a certain amount of edits, there will be certain articles that you can't edit. And again, all of these things are anti-vandalism measures, anti-spam measures like you would get on any website. Just briefly, when we're thinking about our suitable referencing, what we're looking for when we're adding those citations to Wikipedia is published books, mainstream press publications, so not the Daily Mail, but the Irish Times, the Irish Independent, the Times of London, Times of India, those kind of publications, newspapers of note. You can use local newspapers, but you would use them sparingly because they tend to have, I suppose, a local bias a lot of the time. Reputable journals, if we have people from academia, you're only too well versed in the idea of what a reputable journal is, but they will generally be ones that are held by universities or universities give access to, or that you'll get through your public library. And why we want these is because they are verifiable. Somebody has a good chance of getting access to the same book halfway across the world and to be able to verify the information that you've reported is correct. And they are all secondary sources. So they're not the primary sources that we were talking about, the unpublished data or unpublished archival material that's primary, because Wikipedia is a tertiary source. So it's interested really only in that secondary source layer. So what's unsuitable, you can see there, you never cite another Wikipedia article, which is something that new editors can get quite confused about at the start. And it's because it's kind of a snake eating its own tail. We want to look outward from Wikipedia to find our information, not to be kind of going inward. With blogs, there is obviously a caveat with that in that, the V&A have a blog and the Harvard Business School have a blog. They're fine because they're not going to publish just anything. They have systems to check what they're publishing. They have kind of a format that their authors are going to go through. They're not just going to publish anything. So I would say that those are fine. Institutional blogs would be fine, but you're not going to just randomly pull a WordPress. That's not going to be good enough as a citation. So this is the prickly pear that was mentioned earlier, this idea of notability. And this comes from what encyclopedias were attempting to do originally. And the idea was that someone kind of established knowledge. An encyclopedia was never a publisher of original thought. You would never read about somebody who had never been written about anywhere else in an encyclopedia for the first time. They kind of have to be established within their field, within their topic area before they would make that leap into an encyclopedia. And Wikipedia attempts to replicate that notability standard. And to get somebody or some topic or some organization onto Wikipedia, what you're looking for is significant coverage. So if you're looking at news items, that they're not just a trivial mention within it, that they are the subject of the article or one of the main subjects of the article. It's a reliable source, so it's coming from a reputable newspaper. It's coming from a reputable journal. It's coming from a book published by an established publisher. You don't just have one source, you have multiple. One of the red flags, probably more so with history, but I suppose with contemporary topics as well, is that if you're only ever seeing one academic, one journalist, one person ever writing about a topic, that's probably a bit of a red flag that they're not notable enough. If there's only ever one historian writing about somebody and nobody else ever has, it probably hasn't made the leap into notability quite yet. So you want multiple sources, but coming from multiple authors. It isn't just the one person writing about something. Independence of the subject is that, so say we want to write about an academic from Trinity, we don't just want sources coming from Trinity. We want the Irish Times, we want RTE, we want the Independent talking about this person and not just, I suppose, regurgitating a press release or something like that. We want them engaging with the topic, I suppose, meaningfully. Equally, you know, with the independence of a subject that isn't, you know, a promotional piece about a new company, and that's the reason that the CEO is being talked about. You kind of want that kind of substantial corpus about them outside of that kind of material. And if you tick those 4 boxes, it is presumed that you have reached notability. It is not a given. It may still be up for debate. And this does happen, and you will see endless, I suppose, articles and think pieces and discussion about why certain topics are more likely to be nominated for deletion than other things on Wikipedia. There is also kind of unconscious biases and that come into this, that women's biographies tend to just get that bit higher level of scrutiny than men's. And I don't think all of that is coming from a bad faith position. I think that is an unconscious thing sometimes with some editors. But even if you can establish these 4 things, there might be somebody that might try and argue the other way. It's the internet after all. There's always going to be somebody to argue the other way. It's often said that Wikipedia doesn't have any rules, but if it had a rule, this would be it. And it is be bold in the, I suppose, in the American sense of the word, as opposed to the Irish sense of the word, in that we're not asking you to be naughty, we're asking you to be brave. And that you can't break Wikipedia. People try. They try all the time. They try and delete the front page. They do all sorts of madness. But you can't break it. As I said, there's always the previous version of the article. We can always undo. You can always roll back if you're unhappy with what you've done or it's not what you wanted to do. And we could all grow significantly older trying to read all of those technical manuals on Wikipedia and the writing style guides and things like that. But really the best way of learning is actually through editing. And as you want to do things, as you want to apply that learn, you know, kind of learn on the job, basically. Because if you were to try and sit down and learn it all from scratch before you ever made an edit, you probably would never make that jump. So be bold, please. For those of you who want, I suppose, your editing to be measured, or if you haven't created an account yet, this is a link to what's referred to as an outreach dashboard. I'll leave up the slide for a few seconds before I go to it. And what this is an event space. So if you go to this tiny URL, you'll be asked to log in or to sign up using Wikipedia. And it is an event that will monitor our collective edits until 7 o'clock this evening. So it'll give ourselves here with Wikimedia Community Ireland for our reporting, but equally for the Science Gallery to see how many editors took part, how many edits we made. So the impact that we've had over the past, or over this evening. So by all means, don't feel like you have to. This is entirely optional, but the platform, I can show you, does have some learning resources and things like that. So it could be of interest to you going forward as well. So I will very quickly flip over to that. So if you go to that tiny URL, of course, I've just gone to the this is what you will be confronted with. So it'll ask you if you want to log in. So if you already have an account, equally you can request one. So if you haven't created an account already, this will give you a little, so you ask for a particular username and your email address, and either myself or Alice will create an account for you, and you will get a default password emailed to you. It might take a few minutes for it to happen. But it means that if you create an account this way, we're verifying that you're a real person. So you may not have to do kind of captchas and other things that are locked down to a new account for the first few edits. If you've already created an account, don't worry about it. Once you make a few edits to Wikipedia, a lot of those anti-vandalism and anti-spam things go away very quickly. But if you just log in with Wikipedia, it'll divert you to the Wikipedia site to log in, which I'm going to do. And it asks you to authorize. And it's because Dashboard is an outside site, strictly speaking. So I'm going to say I want to allow that. Now it's going to give me an error because it's going to tell me I'm already enrolled. Oh no, I've enrolled myself. Excellent. And we have 5 editors. So you can play around with this. You can go look at your fellow editors in this tab here. And as we make changes, as we edit Wikipedia, we'll see the number of articles edited, how many edits we've all made, and how many words we will have added to Wikipedia. Now, it's only going to monitor edits until 8 o'clock this evening. So it's not going to follow you forever, so don't worry about that. It's just for this evening. You can see there's a training tab up here, which will bring you to some resources regarding how to start editing Wikipedia. So past today, don't feel like you ever have to come back here. This is just for this evening. It's a bit like an Eventbrite for Wikipedia, basically. But if you're interested, the training tab is quite, if you have specific questions or if you want to kind of read a little bit of documentation, that's quite an accessible way of doing it. From the point of view of some of the articles that we were perhaps interested in looking at, there is the articles tab. And unfortunately, so if you go to available articles under this tab, I have added, these are some of the articles that as a group we identified as perhaps articles that should be created or ones that should be improved. So if they have the little 0 beside them, this means the article does not exist. So it'll prompt you to create an article. And then the S there, when I was talking about kind of how articles are reviewed, a start article is kind of a baby article, as it were. It's a step up from a stub. It's not really, really short, but it's still not, I suppose, a fully fledged article yet. So you can see all the ones that we have here are stubs, or pathway point is actually not a stub. This is crowdsourced as well, this review tab. So this has never been updated. That hasn't been updated for it. So that'll be one thing that we can do. At this point, I'm going to ask Alice if she wants to add anything before we keep going, or Shubhangi if you wanted to ask any questions before we go into the next section. So I think that's 45 minutes now that I've been wittering.
No, I think you've got everything covered. This has been a useful introduction. If anyone does have any questions, please put them in the Zoom chat, and we can address those. If there's anything that you're not sure about, if there's anything that you'd like to achieve today and you want to share it with us, then we can help point you to some ways that we can help make that happen.
I found it quite productive to actually be able to have a platform like as a group where we can kind of see the scope of, where we could start editing articles in Ireland, because I know like different other Wikithons have pages that are on Wikipedia themselves. And sometimes like the people who wouldn't think to look for articles to write certainly wouldn't think to look on a wiki for people to write about. So it's actually kind of nice that like I can take images of this, and even just putting this on Twitter, for example, might, like just images of the recommendations we have, might provoke people to then start looking into sources, or if they want to get involved at a later date, might actually propagate like further interaction with the articles, and being able to see if they're stubs or not, or if they exist at all. That's kind of cool. I like that. I also absolutely love the way you phrased it. I think it's something that's been made a lot clearer for me. The idea of an encyclopedia not being a repository of original thought, and that you should never meet a person for the first time on an encyclopedia. And it ties very much into like what you said about encyclopedias being like this very Western written form of history. Because where I grew up, I grew up in India and then around the world, encyclopedias were definitely where I met most of the people that I look up to over time, because for me it was like a way of incorporating some objective knowledge into oral histories, into how I look out at the world. So perhaps it's a matter of how a repository of information is viewed as well, because if we look at for centuries how original thought has become the objective diktat for people in colonized worlds, that just really struck me, because I can totally appreciate it. Makes the purpose of Wikipedia in terms of what it tries to do really clear. Also then balances arise very, very well because of what is presented as objective. So that was quite cool.
there's a certain amount of, I suppose, demystification. And if you do, it's interesting because Wikipedia is now 19. I now work with teenagers who have never known a world without Wikipedia. So for them, the idea, they will still have encountered a written, a physical encyclopedia, and they may have had an Encarta CD if they're tipping towards 20 themselves. But the idea of that being a touchstone is probably quite, for us, we will have all grown up to a certain extent with an Encyclopedia Britannica or an analogue at home, or a children's encyclopedia even. But that's probably going to become less and less of a touchstone for people, because it's going to go further and further back in time. And the idea of actually solidifying knowledge like that in such a fixed form will probably become more and more alien as time goes on. The idea that something is entirely immutable will probably become stranger and stranger. But I think it definitely helps, when you're thinking about, yes, okay, I start to understand why certain problems are baked in from the beginning. And it does mean that, so as I said, this is English language Wikipedia. In terms of notability, it obviously will be language dependent as well. I know for Welsh Wikipedians, if you are in any way published as an author in Welsh, or have, been on a radio, if you, are a radio personality, you voluntarily on a Welsh language radio station, you will probably get an article on Welsh Wikipedia. You might not get one on English, but you are definitely important to that language group. So if we're thinking about, I suppose, minorities in a language form, you might find that there are certain people within Ireland that perhaps should have a Wikipage article that perhaps would find it quite difficult to then make it onto English. So while that can be quite frustrating, because English is obviously, unfortunately, the language in which most people interact with the internet, it doesn't mean that they can't exist in some form somewhere, and it's not about having a lower bar, it's about just having a different set of bars, depending on where you're coming from. So from the point of view of, I suppose, the usability of this list, this will be here in perpetuity. So this website, if I go to my dashboard, all of the events that I've ever created are still exist on this. So if people want to come back to this list in the future, it will still be here, and it will update. So if articles get created, this list will reflect that. And the utility of this list is that if you click on any of them, it'll bring you to Wikipedia, to the article. So this is the article that I created yesterday, which is, safe to say, a subject area that I was completely out of my depth on. I know absolutely nothing about Irish rap or hip hop. I'm not entirely sure that I understand what grime is. I've tried. That's probably massively reflective of my age. But in recent days, with everything with Black Lives Matter and kind of the Irish response to that, there have been lots of really interesting articles written about the voices that we should be listening to. And it gave me resources to kind of say, okay, well, these are probably a constellation of people, organizations, groups that we should be included in some way on Wikipedia. And Denise was one of these people who came up. So I was able to write this article yesterday. So you can see, so if an article doesn't exist, so Ebun Joseph, she's an academic, I think out of UCD, off the top of my head. If we click on her, so her article doesn't exist, you will get this page. And as a brand new editor, you won't have the option of actually starting the article quite yet until you have about 15 to 20 edits. But it will prompt you to create it in your sandbox. So it'll say, do you want to create a draft for this article? And that, what a sandbox or what a draft space is, means that you can start drafting an article in a space away from Wikipedia, in your user space. And that means that you don't have to create the article all in one sitting. So if I was to press start here, I would really need to have a full article written before I would press publish, because it would go live on Wikipedia. And if it isn't a fully formed article, it could get, flagged for deletion, disappear very quickly. So if I want to give myself time and space to write it, I would probably go to my sandbox, which is just right here.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
Sorry, yeah, thanks. No, my chat isn't working, and I put in a question there. I did research last year on 21st century numeracy models, like international, and a lot of curricula based on it. I don't see anything when I keyed in 21st century numeracy models, and it's something I might like to do, but I don't really want to work on any of those articles because I don't know anything about them. So if you just key in 21st century numeracy models, you'll see is nothing that kind of, even though.
This is where I'm not going to be able to spell numeracy.
NUMERACY. And they're international and whole, especially. No, I mean, you see what I mean? Straight away, there's very little. So that's a complete switch off if anybody saw them, whether it was an undergraduate student or something. And you get thrown into all kinds of crazy places there. So I'm going to be working on that during the summer. So it'll be something that I wouldn't mind contributing on. But I don't see anything I want to contribute today. I kind of got an email in the middle there, so I have to do something. I might have to leave shortly.
Well, now, so what I would definitely recommend, but if you are a new editor, and you want to say create a new article, say, so is this kind of like an academic field?
It is an academic field, but it also it's the basis of whole second primary education. So it's totally secondary, at least sources. You know, it's ongoing research all the time. It's definitely international, but you can see it doesn't get a lot of press here or anything here.
There's two things that I'd say is that, first of all, if you're starting a brand new article, so my sandbox is going to look a bit strange, but as a brand new editor, your sandbox will be red, which will mean you'll get that prompt to say, do you want to create this page? And you'll say yes, and you can start drafting there, and it means that you can come back and forth to it, flip back and forth to it. If it's a form, I would then look to other articles that have similar, and this applies to anything that you're writing from scratch. Look for a similar article. So look for an article that's about some form of educational reform or wherever it fits. And try and see if there's an article that would have kind of a similar structure and perhaps give you kind of some wayfinding, basically.
All right, thanks.
So it kind of give you some headings, maybe some categories that should be added to, that kind of thing. And that'll give you prompts then to kind of fill in what in that topic.
Things like graphics and stuff, is that easy to do?
So imagery is an interesting one. If there are images that you've created yourself, you can donate them to Wikimedia Commons. If they are other people's images, unless they're under a Creative Commons license, you can't put them onto Wikipedia.
Yeah, they'd be fairly open source.
So that would be fine then.
Yeah. Okay.
And what you might find is that you might have co-collaborators, say, in, I don't know, in SESI or other group. I know Margaret Almond and a few other people in
I know.
are really in writing this kind of material.
Yeah,
so
right.
You might have collaborators there.
All right. Okay. Thanks, man. It's something I might do during the summer. I think I'm going to have to go shortly. That's the only thing. I got an email of urgency there. So.
No worries.
Yeah.
No worries. We're all on it all the time.
I know, it's not stopping.
In any case, and well, even though like you might not know a lot about the people now, hopefully maybe you can even come back and look at their pages and learn a little more about them, because that was the intention of.
I'll definitely have more interest in looking at Wikipedia. You know, especially with areas that have such heavy detail, you know, say any math subjects and so on. And yet this is something that is just, you know, very, you know, for everybody really. There's nothing on it.
And there is a certain beauty to writing about something for which you have no entry, because if you're talking about
it's fantastic.
Neutrality, I mean, I can't say, I can't say whether or not Denise is a good artist or not. I have not a clue. But what I can do is go off and look for the resources and try as best I can to write about her without that kind of, I suppose, inherent bias. I mean, I do think she's important enough to be on Wikipedia, otherwise I wouldn't write about her. But it's not from, I suppose, a place of being a fan in that way. So sometimes writing about things for which you don't really have a deep love, it frees you a little bit, because you can kind of, you would probably be a little bit more dismissive, a little bit more, you're not going to draw in perhaps sources that would have some of the issues that we've been talking about, but it does mean that perhaps I would be more limited in knowing where the information would be, whereas somebody who is a fan of, or, you know, is steeped in a particular area knows where to find the information. So there's pluses and minuses to both sides.
There's another area I wrote about years ago, which is about, it's based on a calendar of state papers that are in the library. I mean, that's copyright library, so it's available source and everything. I don't know, does Wikipedia, they're all very good sources, but I don't know if there's interest in any of that stuff. Sorry, just
you'd have to have a look around. I mean,
I haven't done for a while.
There are ways and means. So for every article you can see here, so every article has what's referred to as a talk page. So it means that if anybody wants to open a discussion about a particular article, so if you really want to overhaul something, but there's also wiki projects. So for the topic that we're looking at today, wiki projects are quite important. So you can see, so Denise, being a musician, it's a biography of a living person. There is a specific policy around living people, and a lot of that has to do with libel and things like that. But you can see there's Wiki Project Ireland, African diaspora, there's one for women, but equally there will be ones for museums, for libraries. There's a Wiki Project almost for anything. There's a Wiki Project Star Trek, Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, whatever you like.
Wow.
And if you search for specific ones, so even with Wiki Project Ireland, if it's a very specific Irish source, what you can do is go there and find fellow editors. You could pose those kind of questions to say, look, I'm thinking about creating an article on something. You can see here people are notifying if they're saying they've put up an article for deletion. Equally, somebody looking for an image of a particular statue. So there are places in which editors with overlapping interests can talk to each other. So if there's a Wiki Project Maths, so you could go to that page and start a conversation on creating an article on the area that you're interested in, or equally if it's an Irish topic, then you could come here and say, look, I'm aware of this particular source. Is there a way that we can use it? It can be, for something that on the face of it can look quite solitary, it can be quite collaborative at times.
That's great, thanks.
But I suppose what we'll do now, unless Shubhangi has any other questions you want to bring up at the moment, is actually how do you actually start editing? We've talked around it, probably for long enough. How do we actually start making edits to a Wikipedia article? So I'm going to use this as an example. So both examples that I've come up with today are related to the traveling community. I hope that's okay. And this is probably quite familiar to anybody who reads Wikipedia. You'll be aware of what these are referred to as either hat notes or maintenance tags, and there are ways of kind of flagging content as having issues. So there's all sorts of ones that will say lack of inline citations, this is written in a promotional manner, the author of this article seems to have a close relationship with the subject, and they are ways of letting the reader know that there are issues with the content that they're reading. So it's a bit of a, I suppose, a buyer beware kind of tag on it. And you can see that what this one has is that this topic, National Traveller Women's Forum, is not really mentioned in other articles on Wikipedia. It's not an orphan. An orphan is an article that has absolutely no links. No other Wikipedia article links back to this article. This one isn't quite an orphan, it just isn't mentioned very much in other Wikipedia articles. And that's something you can quite quickly fix. If we head to, so if I pop this in, and rather than going to the actual article on it, I'm going to go to containing. So I want articles that perhaps mention, a bit like a Google search, mention the string of words. So you can see we're getting a few, so the main article on Irish travellers. This is what's referred to, I'll have a look at that, as a disambiguation page. I'm going to show what that is in a minute. There are also, so there's the European Alliance. We could see whether or not this group is a subgroup of that or a member group. But the first thing that we can do is, so there's a main article on Irish travellers, and I'm going to see if I can find. So it's listed as, it's probably already linked, I'd say. It is. So this is, I think, the one mention of it. And you can see there's a link to it. So this is the one article that is linking to that article on the forum at the moment. If we take a look at, this is what's referred to as a disambiguation page. So this is used for articles that have similar or overlapping names. So that if you were to search for NTWF, which is obviously the acronym, it could mean two different things. It could mean this very briefly existing trade union in the UK in the 20s, or it can mean National Traveller Women's Forum. And these are also used for people who have similar names. So if we were to look up Patrick O'Neill or Thomas O'Neill or something like that, you will get a page that will list all of the people that you could possibly be referring to. And this is to, I suppose, if you are looking for NTWF and you don't know exactly what it refers to, this means that, you know, you get all the options, basically. But I want to, so there's two issues that I spotted with this article. The first one is that it appears to have this kind of strange red link. And I was like, I'm pretty sure this article exists. And how do we fix that? And second of all, how do we mention this article in another page as relevant? By Jennifer. So what I'm going to do is, what I've discovered is that this is slightly misworded. It should be National Women's Council of Ireland, not National Council of Women of Ireland. So it's an incorrect red link. It's pointing to a red link that doesn't exist because it's the incorrect name. So if I look up and see, do they have a list? Council of Ireland. Do they have a list? They don't have a list of member organizations. You can see that their article is also quite paltry. There's probably a lot more that can be said on this page as well. And one of the reasons that I'm looking at organizations as opposed to individual biographies is that so the idea of being an orphan on Wikipedia, having no other page link back to you, is also a red flag for an article not being notable. So say I wanted to create the article, say on Maria Joyce, and I create the article and no other article on Wikipedia points to that article. It is a little bit of a red flag that perhaps there shouldn't be, she's not notable enough to have her own article. But if there's a constellation of other articles that point to her, that link to that article, so she's mentioned within the body of them, and rightfully so, she's the coordinator, or she's won an award, or she's mentioned in another article in some way, then it's all building up this kind of infrastructure of her notability because she's being talked about in a bit like having all the different sources. She's been talked about in multiple arenas. Equally, it's the same for organizations, as we can see. But by building in mentions of people into articles before they have their own article, you're creating that infrastructure already for them. So when they do get to the point that we can write their biography, there's going to be a bunch of links that we can already create that are already there. So we don't have to go inserting that person into articles to bolster their notability. So I want to actually edit this page. If you're a brand new editor, you will just have one edit button, which will say edit source. When you click on it, when you're editing for the very first time, you will get a little dialog button that will pop up and it'll say, do you want to continue with source editor or do you want to use visual editor? And you will select visual editor. So I'll show you the difference between the two now and how to escape from one to the other if you wish to do so. So we're going to say edit source. So this is what's referred to as wiki markup. This is the OG. This is the original way of editing Wikipedia. It is a pseudo HTML type language, but it really doesn't have any usability outside of Wikipedia. This is probably as useful as it's going to get for you. It's not a skill, it's not a code that you can apply anywhere else. But all of the code that you're seeing here powers different things. So having the 3 dashes, that makes that bold. If we have 4, it makes it italic, or sorry, 2, it makes it italic. 4 makes it italic and bold. So they're just, this notation here is adding a citation. So it's a form of coding that powers a Wikipedia page. But from the most part, most editors, especially if you're editing an existing article, it's actually much easier to visual edit. So if you're ever stuck looking at this page and really don't want to be, you go to your pen icon and you hit visual editing. And now you can see it basically looks like the live version of the page. And you can literally, it allows you to start typing. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to fix this link. So what we actually want is make sure I get the wording exactly right. So I've changed it around, so it's now going to point to the right one. And if I highlight the text, I have my link button and hit link. And it starts searching Wikipedia for pages that have that title. So before it was searching for a form of words that didn't exist on Wikipedia because it was incorrect. And now we can say done. I'm happy. It's now pointing to the National Women's Council of Ireland. And I did check, there is a citation. It's from the NWCI's page themselves, stating that this forum is a member. If I want to add, there's a little bit of, I suppose, structure that we can start adding to this. So if you are anyway familiar with Word, WordPress, any sort of text-based platform, all of this is going to feel quite intuitive. So at the moment we're set to paragraph text. So if I start typing in, it's normal paragraph text. Let's say if I want to add a heading, so I have my tab here, I can press heading and I can add in history. So if I was to start adding more information, say another title I might want to add to this is core activities, would be another kind of normal title. If I press enter, it brings me back to paragraph text. So I'm starting to get a little bit more structure on a page. It's not just a block of text. This is very much a stub at the moment. It's not a full article. It also doesn't have an info box. So an info box, if I can find an example of one now, if we go back to Denise actually. Info boxes are very much, some of them are quite tailored to the article that you're looking at. There are info boxes for people. This is one specifically for musicians. But what we want here is probably an info box for organizations. So I'm going to go insert. I'm going to say template. And I'm going to ask for an info box organization. I'm going to add that in. So I'm going to add name. So name is national. The pressure of typing live is real, and I feel it all the time when I do this. If we had, I don't know if we have an Irish translation of the name, but we can certainly look for one. So you can see these are all the fields that I can add. These are all the fields that are associated with info box organization. We could probably find out things like who founded it. I think we know when it was formed, so I can add that. I'm going to add it in as plain text for the moment. We know it's 1995. So I'm just going to leave it at that for the moment. So I'm going to insert. So we have a rather kind of, I suppose, paltry info box at the moment, but as I fill that out, it'll become more like this. So as you add the information, it'll fill out. But for the moment, we'll leave that as a little bit of a placeholder. What I want to do is, I'm going to take out this one for a moment. The next thing that's, so aside from wiki links, obviously one of the most important things to be able to do on a page is actually to be able to add new information and add citations to back up that information. So I'm going to do a very quick cheeky Google. Nope, over here. And I'm going to go to, I'm actually going to go to news. I'm going to see if there's any kind of newer, more contemporary information that I can add. So with everything that's going on at the moment, with the pandemic, but also the demonstrations that are going on, all of the organizations relating to minorities in Ireland have been getting news mentions. So you can see as regards racism, but equally the treatment, the inability of perhaps people living in halting sites and things like that to actually be able to protect themselves during the pandemic. All of these things are very much kind of at the fore of people's minds at the moment. This is actually quite an interesting piece as well. If we're talking about seeding, I've reached my limit. If we're talking about seeding Wikipedia with mentions of people, so there has been an increase in people from the travelling community engaging with politics in Ireland. The representation of them on Wiki is quite sporadic. But what I want to do is maybe add a mention. So we have Maria Joyce is the coordinator. Can we mention the Shannon hopeful? Eileen Flynn. So I know from reading around that she is help if I could spell. Again, you know, when you're writing here, you're kind of, you know, hoping is not necessarily the word to use in an encyclopedic article. Planning is a far less emotive and I suppose it's a more neutral term than perhaps hoping, you know. So even though I've been editing Wikipedia for 9 years, probably intensively for the last 5, I still find myself kind of tweaking my language because it is a different form of writing, and it is quite a specific form of writing, kind of this kind of neutral tone and kind of removal of any of that kind of language that would be seen as kind of having elements of bias or I suppose prosaic or kind of floral language. It's kind of a difficult thing to oddly enough, it's a difficult thing to put into words. Is planning on running. So now, so I've added this piece of information. This is my source. So I'm going to take the URL, because it's an online resource. Oh, don't know why it's doing it. No, I have it over here. Still behind. It's because it's getting, so I'm going to just grab, because it's looking, it's showing me the HTML for the fact that it's behind the paywall now. So I'm going to see if this works for me. So I've added my little bit of information. Probably misspelled Shannon. I'll fix that in a second. But I want to add my citation now. So once you've finished using, I could, you know, if you have a citation that's quite meaty, you could write a whole paragraph, perhaps drawing on one citation if it's, you know, a particularly in-depth piece from the Irish Times, has lots of information in it. Equally, if it's a book and you're citing from a particular page and you're taking lots of information from it, I could have a whole paragraph here, but I just have one sentence for the moment from this particular citation. So beside your link button, we have our cite button. Citations on Wikipedia always go after punctuation. So I'm after my full stop. So I'm going to press cite. The first thing it's going to prompt me to do is to reuse. These are all the citations that are currently being used on this page. So it means that if you want to use a citation numerous times, you don't have to input it each time. You just select it from your list here. So if I wanted to use any of these here, they're there for me. But what I want to do is use automatic. So automatic is if you have a URL, if you have a DOI, which is from a journal, so it's a unique digital object identifier. Equally, you could have an ISBN. Now, this is just a random book that I'm picking up, but your ISBN on the back of a book beside your barcode or on the inside page, it will ping a book database, WorldCat, and it might be able to generate a citation for you. So if you're familiar with citation software like EndNote or RefWorks or Zotero, this is actually built on Zotero, so it works very similarly to it. So it's going to try and draw in a citation for you. So I'm going to paste in. Yeah.
What is the format of citation for Wikipedia technically? Is that Vancouver?
It's a bit of a...
Or is it just like an independent formation, like form of citation?
Yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag. It makes librarians very sad and angry.
Makes sense. Well, no, it's just in terms of, like, say you were sandboxing a whole article and, you know, you were using your own citation manager to keep reference, would you then have to, like, one by one convert those citations into a wiki format?
Yes. So you'd have to cite as you write on wiki, basically.
Okay, right.
Yeah. I don't think there's any, unless Alice can correct me, I don't think there's an easy way of importing citations into Wikipedia. It is laborious.
Yeah, but the easiest way to cite in Wikipedia is literally to cite in Wikipedia. So if you use the sandbox to draft space, to draft your pages, that's really useful. Or if you want to edit a page live, that's fine too, but it's actually easier in many ways to just kind of dive right into Wiki rather than draft it in a Word document or in another text editor and then paste it in, just because that way you keep all your citations with all your writing and remember where they go.
Sure.
But you can just keep a list of them if that's easier. Just dump a list of citations in somewhere, and and you know, wrangle your draft, and then you can kind
Yeah.
of bring them back together later if that's better.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like it would, and to be fair, I think it still would reduce the point of, like, it would lower the bar for accessibility if people didn't, you know, feel like they had to go on a separate platform to get this completely, you know, objective tone right all the time from the beginning, and get citations right from the beginning as they go. If they could, you know, like, draft something, start getting used to writing some articles, writing in that language before they then try and include them.
So as you can see, it imported basically a citation, and this will not always work. If you have a URL and the website basically is dependent on the website, the metadata being parsed in a way that Wikipedia can scrape it. And it doesn't always get all of the relevant pieces of information, and it sometimes will garble things. So if you're watching me there, you'll see that it didn't actually get Holland, didn't get the full name, so I had to fit. So if it's not coming out quite right, and quite often if you search for an ISBN in a book, some of these fields will not populate correctly. And if you're anyway used to EndNote or Zotero, you're very used to having to tweak your citations. So you might have to go, you know, these might be the wrong way around. You might have your first name, your last name interposed. The source date from the Irish Times for some reason never comes through, but you'll get things like, you should get the title. You might want to do a little bit of tweaking. Sometimes you get kind of a little bit of kind of funny strings of metadata appear in this. But when you're talking about online resources, the most important thing is really that you have, the only things that are absolutely necessary are a title, so the title of the piece that you're citing, the URL that you're drawing it from, and your access date. So this is the date that we're seeing this page live. So it means that if it goes dead in the future, when we were talking about bots earlier, there is the Internet Archive bot that goes around testing URLs on Wikipedia articles, and if one goes dead, it will try and find an archive version of the page as close to the access date as possible. So this means that if the page is updated in the future, no longer reflects the information you've drawn from it, it'll try and find a version of the site from the Wayback When machine or the Internet Archive that reflects the citation at the point where you cited it. So it's, you know, it's quite contingent on that, because, you know, things go live, go dead, get changed all of the time. So we'll see here that based on the flow of the article, it gave it a number. I didn't have to add this. It added the citation number for me, and it popped it at the bottom of the citations here as well. So this you don't edit. When you are editing your citations, it's always in line. So it's always within the text. So say if I wanted to edit one of these other citations, you go to the number and you edit it there. You don't go to the list at the bottom. So you're always interested in interacting with your citations in line in the body of the text. So it literally is as simple as that. As I said, any piece of information you want to add, you're adding your citation to it so that it doesn't get deleted on you. If I was to leave this as an uncited or a reference needed line, it's one of the most likely things to be deleted, because the easiest thing that somebody can do is just come along and revert this edit. You know, if I was a brand new editor and I hadn't verified this piece of information, I'm going to double check that my spelling of Shannon is correct. It is. Happy days. So I'm happy with the little bit that I've done. Yeah, it's obviously quite scant what I've done here, but I'm happy with what I've added. I've added my little info box, as small as it is. I've added a section which gives a little bit of structure to the page, and I've added my one little bit of information about a current member. So I'm going to say publish changes. It's top right hand corner, and this is the edit summary. This is to let other editors know what you've done to a page. So I'm going to say added. You don't have to go blow by blow what you've done, but I'm going to say added info box, section header, and mention. So literally what I'm doing. I'm going to add this to my watch page. I'll show you what that means now in a second. A minor edit, this is not a minor edit. A minor edit is adding a full stop, taking out a comma, perhaps correcting the spelling of a name, something like that. Anything beyond that is not a minor edit. I find in particular women are really prone to tagging all of their edits as minor because they're like, oh, well, I didn't really change much. But minor is really very, very small edits. So rather counterintuitively, to publish this, it's the top right-hand corner. I feel everybody floats down, and it's to do with Windows. I think everybody floats down to the bottom of the window. But so this blue button here, publish changes. And there you go. That's now the live version of the page. As easy as that. One of the things that for me is easier to do in Source than it is in Visual Editor is I'm going to move the logo. So at the moment in Source Editor, this is the wiki markup for the logo. But I want to add it. Oh no, actually, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to copy. Because I've made life difficult for myself because I added the info box in Visual Editor, so it's not going to have. What I'm going to do is now I'm going to go back into, I'm going to move this image basically. So I'm editing, going into my info box. I know the file name that I want to edit, that I want to add. So I'm going to add more information, an image. Actually, logo is what I'm adding. And this is the file name. This is what the JPEG is called. And I'm going to apply those changes. And there you go. Now it's floating within the info box, so I can now remove that one. So we're just getting incrementally closer to the article looking and feeling a little bit more. I mean, I can do all sorts of little tweaks like add logo size. You know, if it's a really oversized logo, 200 pixels is the usual. It's made it slightly smaller, so it's a little bit less dominant. You know, you can get really granular in the edits that you do. And what you'll find, you know, when I was talking about kind of Wikimedians versus Wikipedians, you'll also find that there are Wikipedians that engage in rather different types of editing. So some editors, like Jess Wade, creates articles all the time. That's what she does. You know, she finds somebody who's missing from Wikipedia and she creates the article about them. But what a lot of editors do is editing existing content. So some people are interested in destubbing, so taking articles like this one and expanding it out as much as possible. Other ones are what are referred to as wikinomes. A wikinome tends to do grammatical edits, so syntax, Oxford commas, things like that. And that's the only, so they may never create a whole article ever, but they go around basically copy editing existing articles. So there's no one way to edit Wikipedia. There's people who kind of occupy different spaces within it. So don't feel like just because you're not creating articles left, right, and center that you're not making a proper contribution to Wikipedia. You can definitely find, I suppose, your niche. So the other thing I want to do here is, I'm just going to say move logo. So the next thing I want to show you is, so we have the talk page for each article. But we also have, we can look at the history tab. So when I was talking about this being able to revert an article, you know, a version of an article, if I press save or press publish and I didn't mean to, or it didn't come out, the edit wasn't what I meant, or, you know, a cat walked across my keyboard and saved when I didn't want them to, we can go to view history. So every article will have a history tab. And you can see all of the edits that have ever been made to a page. So you can see this article has only existed since 2018. And the first, so this was the person creating the article. That is my husband. So you can see that the original editor edited quite a bit when they were kind of making it a stub and then expanding it. Somebody made an edit on a typo. We had an IP address make an edit and somebody reverted it. The fact that it's struck out probably means that there was a copyright or a libel issue with the edit that they made. If you ever see an edit removed from the history, there tends to be a legal reason for it. So there's just to make sure that Wikipedia is not exposed in any way based on the content that's there. And you can see then, as of today, my two edits are now within the article as well. So this is what I mean kind of by the long tail. This is not a Wikipedia article that's getting a huge amount of traffic. We can have a look at the page views, which will tell us how many people are actually looking at this article over time. So you can see that it's quite a low amount. So about 4 people a day will look at this page. You can see 10 is a peak there. And what you tend to find is, as people are mentioned in the press, you'll see a spike because people are Googling a particular person or an organization, and that'll be reflected in the page views, because Google, probably about well over 10 years ago now, decided to start floating Wikipedia articles quite high up in search results. And that was something that they did independently. It was not something that Wikipedia asked them to do. The other thing, that to allow me to be able to say remove this here, one of the other edits that I could do is we could maybe add a list to some of the member associations to this page, and then we can create a link to this one. And we can see if this citation is live. So our members. Our members by map, our members by alphabetical order. Ooh, it's probably going to take more work than I... Does anyone want to watch me painfully find citations for each of the member?
I have a really quick question, Rebecca, just on one article that I might want to edit. I'm considering editing the Christine Buckley article, mainly because, like, I know Christine, but I came to know Christine Buckley through Volunteer Ireland, because they have an award named after her since 2014. And like the section on her page just has like Christine Buckley, like her biography, her death, and her honors. Would it be appropriate to start a subheading about the Christine Buckley Award in her page?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay.
What I would probably actually do is I would probably add, say, a life heading here.
Okay.
Because at the moment, so in a better formed Wikipedia article, so actually if we look at the article on Irish travellers, which is quite a long article, you can see that this is what's referred to as the lead section.
Yeah.
And the lead section is basically the abstract. So the longer the article, the longer the lead, because you're summating more. And stubs tend to start out as basically, just an article that just has a lead section and nothing else. You're just getting a sentence, maybe 2. So Christine Buckley could have started off, say, as just this sentence here, I'd say, in an early iteration of the page, which has meant that then the structure of the article is a little bit hit and miss. Yeah. Because it's kind of just become an inflated lead section and then a little bit of information at the bottom. So what I would probably do is add a heading here which says life.
Yeah. Or maybe even like an information box for her, like birth dates and stuff. But yeah, it's just because like I know it's a completely distinct thing, but like this is an award, that's been going on for what now, 6 years, and it has independent citations. So even just a small section on it might not be the worst idea, because that might be what brings people to look her up in the first place.
One that might be somewhat analogous a little bit.
The Mary Mulville Award. Yeah, perfect.
This is a structure. I mean, as I was saying, like find an article that looks the way that you want your article to end up looking. Yeah. It looks like a nice example. So what I would probably do with Christine's one is that I would probably move her honors up, because this kind of happened during her life. Yeah. And then I might rename this death and legacy. And then I would add things that were named in her honor to that section. Yeah, I think it would just be an interesting one to think about now, because at least for maybe last year, maybe the year before that as well. I mean, like last year it was a person who's an asylum seeker who does a lot of volunteering work in the country, etc., who has citations about their work. It might be a good place to feed a few people who are doing impactful work, because it's a recognized award. Definitely. It'd be a good like tiny branch to start out on. And what we could do is there are redirects. So say if we create a section here, which is the Christine Buckley Award, say if that becomes a section unto itself, it means that what we could do is if somebody searches for Christine Buckley Award, they could be redirected to the subsection of this page. And it means that, yeah, that you don't get those issues of people not finding the information that they're interested in, and definitely having a list of awardees,
Yeah.
maybe, you know, chronologically as a bullet list would be an absolutely perfect use.
Super.
I mean, if the award gets written about more and more over time, it could then become its own article.
Yeah.
And we could hive it off. But generally what you'll find is quite often these named scholarships or named awards tend to start off in the honorees page. And then, so one that would be one to write about as well would be the Mary Mulvihill Award.
Yeah, which I'm surprised personally that like that has not been, but maybe I shouldn't be. Who knows?
Because again, it's these kind of things are early career. So the Mary Mulvihill Award is for science students. So the kinds of people who win it. So there's kind of weird anomalies on Wikipedia. Everybody who wins the what's it called, the BT Young Scientist, is that seen as a notability? Notability, which means then that they kind of get elevated a little bit. You know, their career kind of gets a little bit of a jump start in notability, I suppose. But yeah, those kind of, if you know of any named scholarships, named awards, visiting scholarships, anything like that, if we can start adding lists of awardees, that means that those people then are, by default, are mentioned on Wikipedia, and then further down the line, they're already in the infrastructure that we're talking about. So Abeda, that is on our list, was a runner-up in the Mary Mulvihill Award, I think in its second year in 2017. So Abeda Birhan. So we could definitely mention her in a list of awardees there.
Yeah.
And it means that further down the line, when she gets her own article, which I think she will, based on her amazing track so far.
I'm a big fan of this planning. I like it. I like that we call it planning. I like that there's no allusions to like, oh yeah, you know, we hope this will get done. But I think that's the point of this event. You're doing something that the first step is taken by people who have the experience to do it. So this is us taking that first step because someone will come across it and it will have sources and then they will look into it further. So it's nice. I like how objective it is. I remember one of the best things I ever got told by an old mentor and someone I don't speak very often anymore was, you know, it's like, I get what I want. It's not always easy and it's not always a short road to it, but I get what I want. Why can't you? And it always struck me because, you know, this is a white male, like industry academic type. I was like, actually, yeah, why can't I? Why should I have to restrict myself to, you know, what would be expected for people from marginalized groups or generally, or what I can expect to achieve? Best thing to do is just to go out and do it and like not play around about what you want. So this is a good way of accomplishing it, I think. I will go on record with this attitude, clearly.
I think definitely, I mean, you know, looking at the work of Jess Wade in particular in the UK, she's written about academics from all over the world, focusing on minorities in particular. And there are other people who've done similar. I've forgotten, is it Amy Templewood in the US? She set herself a challenge that every time that she would get a bit of sexist abuse online, that she would write an article about a female scientist. So it was kind of her way of channeling that energy into something productive.
That's pretty great. Like, there's a part of me that's like, oh, bless you, like you shouldn't have to do more work because you get unsolicited abuse. But you know what? You're going to be angry anyway. You might as well do something productive, like shout at trolls.
I felt like it was a very Mary Beard way of doing it or something.
Yeah, I mean, like, if it's just like, you know, I'll do a minor edit somewhere, we'd get so much done.
I don't know if you want to kind of take the ball on that a little bit, Alice. Want to mention anything in relation to kind of the idea of laying breadcrumbs for people?
Can do. I think Jess is an inspiration with her editing, and one of the things that she's very good at is laying breadcrumbs and thinking about the long tail of editing, and the sort of circular thing of editing as well. Things on Wikipedia are very visible, which is great, and that's why we want them there. Sometimes things aren't able to be on Wikipedia just yet. So we do the planning, as we've been talking about, and thinking about how we can get them there, seeding mentions of things, nominating people for prizes in the real world, making sure that journalists are writing about them. If we have any links with journalists or anyone who edits, for instance, a scholarly society magazine, even just starting to make sure that those publications are acknowledging people's work is a really great thing to do. And then once you've got enough citations, once you've got enough ways to mention someone, making sure that they're incorporated into Wiki is a powerful thing, because the first thing that journalists usually do when you tell them they should write about someone is to Google them. And if they find an obscure publication or lots of academic stuff, or just social media and blogs, then that's one thing. But if they can find a nice coherent summary, because that's the great thing about Wikipedia, right? That's the reason we go there for the answers first, because it's a short, coherent summary, and we know we won't have to read millions and millions of pages to get the gist. So time poor people revert to Wikipedia. So if you can seed those mentions, be a bit sneaky, do your planning, make sure that people are referenced and mentioned and that their work is acknowledged there, then that's a great way to sort of break your way into that cycle of the same people being talked about all the time. I've just got, well, there's just a comment. Apparently a lot of people use people's Wikipedia articles as a way to introduce them, which makes total sense because it's a summary of the things you're best known for. So if someone's...
Like the number of times I've told people to be like, just Google me, and I'm like, oh no, Google is just an extraction of people like picking up your latest tweet without asking you permission, and just like literally like shit posting the first, excuse my language, the first 2 pages of Google, just seeing like random things that have nothing to do with you really.
Yeah, whereas Wiki is a bit more manageable, it's a bit more coherent. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I was one of the things that I've been looking at, and it's something I've been recommending to, I suppose, like people who are earlier in their careers, or you know, just starting out but have honestly again a little bit of their own resources, like a platform where they can establish such a thing, is to set up something like a website for yourself, or even just set up somewhere where, you know, you have an RSS feed for anything that pings your name, so that if somebody needs to look you up, they have like an objective list of citations. Like I remember a couple of years ago when I started any work in the public sphere, when I was actively doing repealist work and getting cited, like I had a press page on my old website that literally had like by month organized wherever my citations were. I do not now, but it's helpful because it means that when people ever actually wanted to know about something, you know, you don't just give them, oh, I do this. You actually let them go and explore the context and stuff objectively themselves, which is a good surrogate for if you don't have a page, but you think you're likely to get one.
Yeah, and also I think you can also think of editing Wikipedia as, you know, an act of allyship. You can also think of it as an act of networking. For instance, if you do create a page for a person, you can reach out to them and say, there are no photographs of you that are Creative Commons licensed. Would you like to upload one to Wiki Commons? And then they get the benefit and a nice picture that they don't hate of themselves. That will be the go-to one that everyone will use because it's labeled as free for reuse. And you get to kind of introduce yourself and say, you know, I've done this page because I think that you're a really important, notable person who's done all this work. So it's a great way to have a good reason to speak to someone who you might otherwise not necessarily know how to begin a conversation with. So yeah, that's something to think about too. I
think that's really important from the point of view of people who are not people of color who are not part of the LGBTQ community, but want to edit Wikipedia, this is another form of demonstrable allyship. You know, you are promoting the work of maybe organizations, you're elevating them. So this is one that I wrote a few days ago for Massey, and it, you know, talking about kind of seeding, I was able to then create red links for Lucky and Bulani, so that if and when their articles, which I think they most likely will be created, they're already going to be mentioned in these articles as well. You know, with these ones, with organizations, it can be quite tough to write in that neutral way that we were talking about, probably even more so perhaps than writing about people, because nearly all information that you're going to find about an organization is going to be written in a promotional manner. You know, it's going to come either directly from them, which is not an ideal source to work with, or it may be kind of a sister organization that's promoting joint work, or, you know, it could be perhaps a highlight piece from a press outlet that has, you know, sympathies perhaps towards whatever the goal of the organization is. So you do have to be quite, I suppose, savvy to ensure that you're drawing out, I suppose, the most, just the kind of the bare facts from the information based on how it's being presented to you. So some of the things that, you know, if you're kind of interested in how you might think about kind of parsing that. So from this particular citation here, which is, this is the Irish Refugee Council talking about Massey as a group, and they synthesized the work that they do. And then I took those bullet points and I paraphrased them. So I wasn't copying and pasting them directly. I changed up the wording, because you can't copy, because that would be a copyright violation. And perhaps, you know, kind of just parsing the words a little bit, just to maybe take out some of the, I suppose, very philanthropic advocacy type words that are fantastic for press releases and getting people behind your cause and things like that, but perhaps are not, you know, encyclopedic in tone. You know, the utility of those two types of languages is very different. You know, press release from a charity is trying to draw you into, you know, and this is not a charity, but, you know, an advocacy group, you know, to maybe solicit donations or, you know, allies or people to work with them or to go to a protest or whatever. And then the language on an encyclopedia is going to be very different from that. So if people are interested in maybe like a working, and I'm not by any stretch of the imagination saying that I get this 100% correct, but this is an example of how you could start taking the information that you find and then making that transition into a Wikipedia article. And the one that I wanted to create today, and what we could do for the next while, is I was going to start drafting the article on the Irish Travellers movement. So at the moment, I briefly mentioned redirects a minute ago. So redirects are if somebody searches on Wikipedia for a specific thing, it will redirect you to another article. So at the moment, if you type in Irish Traveller Movement, it redirects to the main page on Irish Travellers. And that's because if we go down the body of the text, I think under advocacy, it gets mentioned. So it doesn't have an article of its own. It's only mentioned kind of in passing within this one. And if you want to know what a redirect page looks like, it's a little bit technical, but this is the article at the moment, or the article space for Irish Traveller Music and what movement, and what it does is it redirects you to this article here. If we look at the history for it, as you can do with all Wikipedia pages, somebody created this redirect 18 years ago. So in some ways, in the early days of Wikipedia, redirects were not a lazy solution, but they were a very quick solution to, rather than having to create the article, to get people to relevant information very quickly. Now I think we can probably make the case that this should be an article in its own right and not necessarily be redirected to that main page. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to start drafting this in my sandbox. So at the moment, my sandbox looks a bit odd because I started drafting a different article, which has since been published in this space. But it operates your sandbox. As a new user, this will be a red link. So again, you'll get this prompt to say, do you want to create this page? And you're going to say yes. And it'll be, you can look at it either in visual or source editing. So if I press edit on it, it will look and feel and operate exactly like a Wikipedia article page. And I can start drafting this article here and now. So I can start taking, I suppose, a little bit of inspiration from, this is obviously not an amazing article, but it gives me kind of the broad headlines of what I might want this article to start looking like. So if I go to this and I could say I want this to say, and I can start creating something that looks and feels like an article, but I don't have the pressure now of making this a fully fledged article to publish this evening. I can start it and then I can publish it later when I'm completed with it, when I'm happy with it. So it gives you a little bit of space to work with it in the draft space. You can create as many drafts as you like in your user space. You have one sandbox, but you can have many. What you can do is you can, so if I go to another tab here quickly, so I'm going to go to my user space. Just to quickly show you, you do have, this will be a red link for you as well. You can create what's referred to as a user page. When I talked about earlier the gender divide on Wikipedia, how do we know that? We're reliant on people identifying their gender on their Wikipedia pages, which the majority of editors don't tend to do. I have done. I've tagged myself as a woman. You never have to create this page. There's no onus on you to do so. When we were talking about the conflict of interest earlier, you can see I've stated my conflict of interest, saying that, you know, I'm the project coordinator for Wikimedia Community Ireland, so that people can't claim that I'm using that position in any kind of abusive or nefarious way. So I'm stating that affiliation, so I'm getting that conflict of interest out of the way. But say if I wanted to create, say, a draft of this article with this, rather than it saying sandbox, I want to create one that says, so I'm going to get this right. So in my navigation bar, I'm going to say, I'm going to type in, I'm going to copy Irish Travellers Movement. I'm going to press enter. And what this will do is, rather than it being sandbox, it's saying, do I want to create this specific page? So I'm creating this page in my user space to use as a drafting space. And so if you wanted to work on multiple articles, you can do so within your user space. If you don't edit one of these pages for 6 months, it will probably be flagged for deletion. And that's just to stop draft Wikipedia articles rising up in Google search and other search engine results, so that people aren't pointed to what isn't a fully fledged Wikipedia article, but looks and kind of feels like one. So it's to stop people getting confused by draft content looking like live article content. Also, you do have to adhere to copyright and everything else in this space. So if I was to copy and paste, if I was to dump a load of text from another site into this space, it'll probably get deleted, because again, Wikipedia can't host plagiarism in that way. But it means that, you know, you only have one sandbox, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you can only have one user page. Equally, on your sandbox, you could create multiple sections. You could start drafting multiple articles, and you could just copy and paste the content. Even if it's an article, say like the one that we were talking about, Christine Buckley, you're not necessarily comfortable jumping right in and starting to edit it. There's a section you definitely want to start. You could start drafting it in your sandbox, and then you could copy and paste it over when you're happy with it. So it's kind of your drafts, your sandbox is kind of like your holding pen, your safe space, where you can work away on something.
I have a really quick question just about the article, because I've got all my citations up, so I'm literally just like slotting like previous lists of awardees. How okay is it to make a red link? Just, you know, if I'm like, oh, this person, like for example, Ola, who won the award this year because like quite involved in anti-racism work, may have other citations, but obviously I don't have the time to do that right now. Like, would it be okay to red link that person and say, like, just as an indicator in the future for somebody who might want to edit that further?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there is.
How does that even happen, I guess, because I don't know how to do that.
So red link works in exactly the same way as creating a blue link. So we'll just do one quickly here. Say if I wanted to make, so Maria Joyce at the moment doesn't have an article. So I highlight the text I'm interested in creating an article about, or creating a red link for. You press the link button. So you see it's not coming up with anybody. Now, I know for a fact Maria Joyce is actually a redirect that'll point to this page, but say, just for the sake of argument, just to make it a red link, so this is the exact title of the article that I want to create. I just press done, and you can see it comes up as a red link.
Okay, great.
So if the page doesn't exist, it'll come up as a red link. Now, obviously, if you have a typo, like we saw earlier, it'll create a red link that won't resolve.
Yeah.
And there is one issue with, especially if somebody is known by various names, or perhaps has name variants in some way, if we're talking about people specifically, creating red links. Once you've created the article and you might have to go around somewhat slavishly updating some of those, especially if it's a really common name. So, so that you're writing about the specific Mary Buckley that you definitely are referring to. So there is a little bit of, I suppose, admin work in that.
Okay.
So, we might find that this group are referred to as NTWF in articles. So we might want to go to those articles and highlight it and specifically point to this article rather than the one on the acronyms.
Yeah. Super. I'm actually really enjoying this, and I'm like, I know I shouldn't sound so shocked and horrified just because my attention span is normally absolutely zero. So being able to actually sit down and do something like this and genuinely getting into it is a pretty big deal for me. But yeah, it's really simple. So it's simple, impactful changes you can make, which get a lot of people, for example, in volunteering, I remember at one point, I was asked if someone could nominate me, and then they turn around, they're for something, and they're like, yeah, but if you're not running a company, what's the point? Why would I nominate you for something? I was like, okay. So volunteers, they do impactful work. They're part of large organizations who do deserve to be recognized for the work they do if they're getting national awards for their volunteering capacity. But it's very often not something that people think to put up. So even small references do help.
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
Nice to be able to do that.
And the majority of people who make edits, the majority of edits that happen on Wikipedia are those anonymous IP edits. They're not logged in by registered editors, and most of them are really little finicky, little bit of copy editing here and there, maybe adding, clarifying a sentence, kind of tidying up language, that kind of thing. So they are the majority of edits that are happening. The majority of Wikipedia editors are not sitting down and creating a whole article from scratch, sat down with a pile of books beside them. And one of the things that I would definitely advocate for, if you have access to a particularly good resource, be it a paywalled journal or, a particular book or something that you can use the one source to add that citation to 10, 15, 20 articles.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, that kind of labor, you're releasing that little bit of information from, so say if you have access to paywalled, Irish Times articles, exclusive ones. So there's one that is detailing all of the past winners of a particular award that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And mentions all of them and maybe the dates, then it means that you can, and the particular organization perhaps that they worked for. So it means that, say we could go to the article on the Traveller, the Women's Forum, and the National Council of Women, and add, in 1990, such and such won such and such award, for their work with, and then you can add it to both articles, and then they can link to each other, and the person can then be a red link, within those. So, thinking about the types of information you have access to, and where is the most relevant place that you can add that information to? Where is the interested reader going to want to go and find that information? And some of it's obvious and some of it not so much, there are things that you can do as well, sometimes there are there are pages about schools, so you can add, notable alumni. They tend to need to have an article, but you could still, if somebody was involved in a particular award while they were a pupil of a school, you could mention that. A particular faculty in a college. If the academic, has an article and then maybe their doctoral student or something like that, and they collaborated on something, then it could go in the academics page, kind of almost as a holding pattern for hopefully when the person has their own career later on. It's it's incremental, you know.
Yeah.
So I don't think we have any more questions at the moment, do we? From social media or...
I'm gonna have a question really soon once I've updated this, and I can be like, Rebecca, does this look right?
Because otherwise what I was planning on doing is maybe starting, I'll do this bit of editing and, you know, does that work for everybody?
Could you just repeat that? I don't know why I just didn't hear. No.
I'm just going to start drafting this page, just so you'll see a bit of live editing happening. That sound good?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so Claire added to the text or to the messaging ages ago when we were talking about how Wikipedia is used by the media. So Sinead Burke, who's had a page for a few years now, I think, she said the lead section, so the start of her Wikipedia articles nearly always have people introduce her.
Yeah, like I know that all introductions just get copy pasted from whichever the first hit is.
And that's something that's been long-standing. What I've discovered with people who are talking about even as just a subject area, they will often take the definition from Wikipedia because it's the most succinct. You know, they could be talking about LiDAR or, you know, polymers or something like that. But the Wikipedia article has the most succinct definition of what they're talking about, so they'll often, and fair play to them, they usually credit it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so. Oh, and Massey. Okay, so I can link her to Massey. That's great.
Yes, so one of the things I have not done, which you can probably do, is add a redirect from Massey, actually. Here we go.
Okay, so I need site here. Okay. There we go. And I will add a link.
Keep getting this name wrong.
What is Massey even under on Wikipedia?
Movement of asylum seekers in Ireland. That's it there. Yes, I keep getting it wrong as well.
Excellent. Okay, so I have made a lot of edits actually. Like I have done a thing for once. I'm reasonably proud of.
Excellent.
I'm just gonna take a screenshot of that and be like, this is what it looks after it's been edited, before it's been published anyway. Like there is actually a good bit of stuff from what the actual like announcement page of the Christine Buckley Award on Volunteer Ireland, where it like details all the other awards she has won.
Yeah.
Like I don't know how far down the actual like secondary sourcing trail if that goes, if that makes sense. Like I don't know if I can verify those awards.
Yes.
So probably better not go down that particular rabbit hole right now, but certainly something to look at later.
What I would probably do is kind of, as a rule of thumb, is I would add, I suppose the most prestigious is probably the wrong word, but I suppose the one that's most recognizable.
Yeah, like there's one that's like a European award that actually, you know what, I might even add now before I.
Yeah, I mean, something like that. Yeah, because otherwise what I would probably do is, yeah, having the Volunteer Ireland citation is fine, and you could probably use that. But what you would probably want to do is, yeah, verify, maybe especially if there isn't dates for them, you know, to kind of Google Christine Buckley and then a particular award, and then see if you can find news articles from the time or since that have stated that, and then you could add them maybe in chronological order or add some kind of, you know, add a bit of shape to it somehow.
2009 awards. Oh, okay, yeah, like there was actually old pages for some of them. That's good.
Yeah, so.
And, like as an academic editor, this just gives me like a weird sort of atavistic joy that it really shouldn't. Like this is a person who's like, I have procrastinated and since missed like 2 deadlines for articles or publications that like the work was done for, but I've just not had the spoons in lockdown to do it. I feel like once I start writing like this again and, you know, continuously citing and being as objective as I can with my language and stuff, it actually really helped me just in my own like editing and academic work.
I mean, it is a form of writing practice, definitely.
Yeah, and like it's not something like you can be wrong. Like I don't know if that makes sense, but it's not something you can be wrong about because you can't put wrong stuff on Wikipedia. But it's also not something you're independently invested in because it's not your own research or whatever.
It's a great.
It's just like really writing fact as fact, and that's good training.
Yeah, it's a really great way to train yourself out of some bad habits as well. So Wikipedians as copy editors are fantastic at spotting places where you are being very indirect and talking about, oh, this happened, rather than, you know, this person did this or this group did this, or you know, being ambiguous about that stuff. They don't let you get away with it, and even things like being euphemistic. It's made my writing a lot clearer for writing for non-native English speakers, because instead of saying things like passed away, wiki editors will make darn sure you say died. So those kinds of edits, when you see them being done to your work enough times, they sort of become something you incorporate into your writing in the first place, which just makes it better.
Yeah, like it's just definitely stuff that I know. Like there's stuff that I know in theory I need to, you know, train myself out of, just in terms of how I write in an academic sense and what the things I focus on. Whereas in this case, it's just, you really realize what objective means, because you kind of want to be so precise, especially with smaller articles like this, where if you're not, it might just get removed.
Yeah, and as Alice was saying, like the euphemisms are a big one that let people down, like, you know, saying somebody passed away or they tied the knot. All of that kind of language is just weeded out immediately. And what I find, you know, especially if you have been through third level and you've had to write essays, a lot of that is quite lazy, you know, word count play, where you're just trying to bump up the amount that you've written, and perhaps maybe repeat things in slightly different sentences again, you know, quite, you know, further down in a paragraph. And Wikipedia just, you know, it's in some ways it's a baptism of fire, because you'll see student groups and they're, you know, if they end up with a sentence surviving, sometimes because they have been trying to use all of those kind of verbal tricks to inflate the content that they're adding.
How do you quibble surviving? Like if they're survived by their people or something like that, or even terms like, you know, this person, like I suppose in Christine Buckley's case is actually quite spot on, because like, would you just say like this person experienced sexual abuse, because you wouldn't really say like they were a victim of it or survived it, because that's a motive?
Yeah, I mean, you would say, I mean, especially if I suppose it depends, because yeah, you try to avoid weasel words basically, or kind of caveats. Now, it obviously becomes quite tricky if you're going back into the past, because sometimes the record is not clear. You know, if it's been interpreted that perhaps somebody was, you know, lesbian or transgender or something like that, but within their life never stated one way or another, and it's historical interpretation, then what you do is you try and find as many reliable sources as possible, and you represent all of the historical interpretations. And you say, you know, this particular historian says X and this particular historian says Y, and you try not to put too undue weight on one or the other, and you try not to elevate fringe voices, you know. So if you're talking about somebody like that who is an abuse survivor, and all of the mainstream media says, you know, this is something that happened, and then like the Mirror, you know, says something quite kind of, you know, puts scare quotations on things and stuff like that, you're not going to elevate that as a source. And an awful lot of those kind of news organizations are blacklisted, you know, a bit like with the Daily Mail. The Mirror and the Sun are not accepted as citations on Wikipedia. You'll get a little error saying, please don't use these.
I love that. That's actually class.
Because they're seen as too biased, basically. I think Russia Today, and there's a whole long list of news sites that are, you know, Fox News would be another one, that are not accepted as citations. There obviously are moments where if you are talking about them being biased news organizations, then you would cite them as examples, but you're not going to use them in other articles. But yeah, I suppose you try and use as the plainest, most factual. If it's something, what you'll find is the likes of certain, when somebody has passed away, has died quite recently, you'll see a little hat note on their article saying, you know, this is an unfolding event, you know, especially for speculation. Similarly, if somebody is in a court case or something like that, and things have not been established, there isn't, you know, a court finding or something like that, those articles quite often are protected until such time as the facts are
there's more detail.
Yeah. So a lot of the work that Wikipedians do is trying to ensure that that kind of dubious material is weeded out as quickly as possible.
Okay, so I think I'm ready to at least save the edits I have now so you can see them, I guess.
Excellent.
And give me all the criticism, like live. I'm totally ready.
Oh God.
No rejection sensitivity at all. So this is, do I have to click watch this page if it's not a minor edit, or?
Oh yes, so I didn't say what watch this page does, so I will tell you that now.
Okay.
So if you look up there, so if you want to, so watching this page means that you will basically go into your watch list and you will see if anybody else makes changes to the page in the future.
Okay.
So if you want to click it.
What did I do? I amended headlines, added segment on the Christine Buckley Award and its recipients. Okay. So there goes nothing.
Cool. So I'll refresh. Has it saved?
It says here it was published.
There we go.
Oh my God.
Nicely done. Yeah, brilliant. You can see the difference that it makes having. So once you get more than 3 headings, then the little content box immediately pops up for you.
Oh, so the contents box does it by itself. I was wondering, like, should I add it or?
That's automatically generated.
Okay.
So cool. Yeah, that's dead handy. And it just, you know, ease of access. You know, that people, if they're looking for specific information on something, you have a nice amount of citations going on there, which is great. Ooh, the flying nun. I wrote about a different flying nun at one point, as one does. That's looking great. Fantastic.
I think that's a really good, maybe it's, okay, no, I'm not going to say it's self-aggrandizing because I'm actually quite tough with it, objectively speaking. But like, it is genuinely the difference one totally new editor can make to just one article where they just happen to like know something random. Like, if I hadn't seen Christine Buckley and I hadn't like gone to the Volunteer Ireland thing, I would never even have known.
Exactly.
But
You don't
added so
necessarily...
many other people and like now made links for other people from like Massey and stuff to be platformed.
Exactly. And it, you know, you don't have to be, as you said, you don't have to be thoroughly invested in a topic to write about it, you know, or be totally steeped in it. So long as you're willing to do a little bit of work to chase up your sources, that's the main. And you discovered how to add a bullet list. So if we, you know, as we were saying here, like, it's the bullet list is, you know, again, if you're used to Word or anything like that, you can also add a numbered list. If you're adding, say, a quote, you could indent it, that kind of thing. So I mean, the next step would probably be to add an info box. It's obviously slightly more difficult when somebody has passed away, especially somebody contemporary, to find an image of them under an open license. But because she is relatively recent, what you could do is, and I was going to try and do the same thing for Mary Mulvihill eventually, is ask people who knew them if they have a photograph that they would be willing to share. And then that means that you would have an image that you could add. There are other ways and means of getting illustrative images onto Wikipedia, but they're a little bit difficult to navigate at times. But yeah, well done.
Happy with that.
You feeling an immense sense of pride and
I actually feel like I've made an actual tangible change from what I intended to do with this whole project. Like, when I proposed this at all, it was just like, you know, thinking about something like a 30 under 30, and then I was like, nope, that's ageist and also irrelevant, because as we've talked about, like, people of color often don't get talked about when they're young. It just doesn't happen. Particularly, so I was like, nope, you know, we'll just create a space where people can come and like write about like PSC in Ireland that they'd like to see platformed, or people from marginalized groups, and we'll see if we can make a dent in this huge thing that needs to be done. So yeah, chuff.
So
I feel like I actually use like skills that are normally confined to, like, you know, writing journalism stuff or editing, you know, dry academic work. And I actually managed to create something where people will be able to see themselves reflected. So
what I'm going to do, and you know, it's one of the things that's built into the wiki infrastructure, is, so I'm now looking at the history. So I can thank you for your edit.
Oh, cute.
Do we have a thank? So I'm going to say, do you want to publicly send thanks? I'm going to say, yes, I do. I'm going to say thank you.
Thank.
What I'm also going to do is I can go to your talk page,
and
I can give you some wiki love.
Oh my God, I feel so loved right now. This is wonderful.
So I would usually, for these kind of events, because usually these would be in life, you know, there'd be real life events, I usually give people the real life Barn Star, but that feels quite disingenuous.
I would really like a star right now. Like, this is so cute.
Ooh, we'll go with the original.
Oh shit! Again, sorry. I just realized I assume that Volunteer Ireland has a page, maybe, and if they do, I should have linked it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do have a bit. No, do they? There's a page that says Volunteer Brackets Ireland. Presume it's that.
Well, you can always double check. When I'm unsure, I'll open it in another tab and double check it's definitely the article that I want to link to.
Okay. Pretty. Oh yeah.
No, I don't think so.
Thank you guys for helping, like, in a very tangible way, helping me do this and figure out how I can contribute to something that, like, seems both really straightforward but really big. But then, yeah, thank you. Just for me, somebody just moderating this has actually made a great difference in, like, considering I stream, you know, every day, just talking about life stuff, and then considering, you know, every single day I spend like 30 minutes on something like kind words, just sending out anonymous love to people who need it. This just seems like another way you can anonymously do a little bit of good.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And it's talked about kind of in terms of good digital citizenship. So,
yeah,
you know, it's one of the things that both myself on and off and the Wikimedia group from the UK, you'll see, yes, we're all on Twitter. And, you know, we promote the usual things. We, you know, Slate talks about Wikipedia and kind of things like that. And we'll, you know, tweet information related to the work that we do. But one of the guys who used to run the UK account would look around for people tweeting about errors that they find on Wikipedia and kind of pointing them out, going, Wikipedia, wrong again. And you're like, you could fix it. You can press the button and you could fix it. Rather than, it's a bit like that, you know, Wikipedia got hacked again. You know, it's this kind of, it's quite lazy journalism quite a lot of the time, because it's not really news. You know, the fact that Wikipedia gets vandalized is not news to anybody. But the fact that they're perpetrating this idea that, you know, it's constantly getting vandalized, so you can't rely on it. But also the fact that, you know, just press the edit button and fix it. Like, if you have a problem with the content that's on Wikipedia and you can make your case and you can find your sources, do it. You know, it's never the answer they want, though.
Yeah, it's never too late to start, but also like the people who have problems are probably not going to be the people who are starting.
Yeah. So this is your, so if you want to watch an article, so if I open something random, so the article on Lyra McKee, if we take a look at that. This is an article that's in my watch list. So if you want to watch a page, it's this little star here. So if it's not highlighted, it's not in your watch list. If you want to add it, if you're just reading it and you want to add it to your watch list, you just press the little blue star. Equally in the edit bar, if you press watch this page. And what this does is that if you go to your top right hand corner and you have your watch list here, if you go to that, it'll show you all the changes that have been made to all the articles that you're watching in the past. The default is 3 days. And what this means is that you can see what others, so that edit summary is in the history of the article, but it's also here, so you can see what people are saying that they've done. So what you'll notice is that some of them, so if it's marked with an M, that means that it's one of those minor edits. So it's somebody just tweaking something very small. A B is a bot, so it's a bot edit. It's not a human. So you can see Sean O'Boyle is in there. That's Alice. Good work, Alice. So I have a ridiculous. I'm watching 1,500 articles for my sins, and what
a list of styles. I'm sorry, but like that is my best. That is my favorite out of your watched articles.
Where's that one?
That's class.
List of hat styles. Yes, because there was the weirdest. There are some hoaxes on Wikipedia that have lasted a very long time, and one of them on very little, well, not a well-known one, but in the list of hats there was a cheese hat which had persisted for a really long time. So I removed the cheese hat because I could find no verifiable sources for it. And I've watched the page ever since.
She's like, I dare you, cheese hat person.
I'm just waiting for them to add back in. You know, I watched the article on tea as well. There's another one. It's the article on gender bias on Wikipedia.
Yeah. I gotta say, like, for an objective platform, like I remember the last time we were doing this on Once Upon a Pandemic, and we were talking about, say, like the wiki skeptics community or the general like scientist skeptic community, and how like you have like these very opinionated like factions that can all, I think, are united by their aim to contribute what they interpret as an objective truth. And yeah, it's just fascinating, like the random like hoaxes and craziness that all amounts to like a few objective lines of text.
And it has happened where, and it's one of the issues perhaps sometimes with journalists using Wikipedia in a non-critical way, is that they can perpetrate or they can perpetuate an uncited piece of information from Wikipedia. Then it goes into a written source, and then you have a citation for something that. So there have been cases of that kind of circular issue, and most of them have been weeded out. And what happens is that people, those talk pages that I showed you, those article talk pages, if there's an issue like that, that's where the discussion will happen. And if there are differing opinions, somebody will open a discussion on it, seek consensus, and people can then vote. So it's a bit like when an article gets nominated for deletion. Unless there are speedy deletions, but they tend to happen on articles that have an inherent problem with them. So somebody's published something that's obviously PR, it's a press release, something is massively libelous, or a copyright violation. There's no two ways about it. They will get speedily deleted because there's no defending it, basically.
Yeah.
But if somebody gets an article gets nominated for deletion, then there's a discussion about it.
Yeah.
And then,
although saying that, I should say I had somebody get in touch with me about a draft today that was nominated for a speedy deletion because of copyright violation. And actually, if you took a close look at the report, because I don't know if everyone knows that Wikipedia has a copyright checker that is the same Turnitin system that universities use. And this Turnitin system had flagged an article that this person had created for a copyright violation. But if you actually looked at the report, all of the things, the words that were replicated word for word, were descriptions of institutions where someone had worked and the prizes that they had won. So there was a lot of duplication, but of things that you can't rewrite because it's the name of a place or a prize.
I was literally just worrying about that now in the article. Just like, if they're given as X person, X organization, I'm like,
so that it can happen, where someone maybe hits that button a little bit speedily, and if it does, just don't panic. Just know that you're very entitled to leave a message to the person who nominated it or who said that and say, oh, can you take a look at this, because I think it's probably the institutions and the prizes. I've been really careful. So do assume good faith that that they may not have realized where that violation has come from, and engage in a conversation rather than thinking, oh no, that's it, I just give up. It's very easily fixable, but just can sometimes require taking a deep breath when you've worked quite hard on something and then see it nominated like that.
It's okay, just assume it's reviewer 2. Like, I suppose anybody who's involved in academia will just be like, this is reviewer 2, isn't it? The person who will just ruin your draft because they want like their one tiny thing included. But I suppose like that also then leads to a wider conversation of like, how people approach situations like that, like how people approach issues of conflict. Again, on Wikipedia, you can't see the person's face who's editing, sure, but they're, if you are a person of color, if you're from a marginalized group, you might just be less inclined to take that on, and rather than just like let something be deleted. And I suppose that then affects those disparities. Rebecca, I have another question. You have your, like, in your talk pages, you have Ranelagh there. Has that page been edited to include like the pronunciations of Ranelagh? Or like Renelagh? Yes, it has. Amazing.
So again, there would
be hoping to see like if somebody had actually like done that.
And there are editors that specifically will do that. Will add the
Thanks for the clap, Eve.
And also the Irish. There's particular. This is that's a form of wiki markup. You see the way it's generating so if we look at the source, you can see it's the IPAC, and it's a particular. So when you see something in Wikisource. So cool. That's what I always refer to, because of a teacher of mine, curly Q brackets, the kind of curly brackets. That denotes a template. So it's using a template which is then going to render the text in a particular way. So quite often, the little thing that says, citation needed, when you look at it in wiki markup, it'll have these curly Q brackets because it's using a template.
There's so much to learn. Like, I suppose if you're trying to transcribe, like small things in Irish, like my written Irish is way better than my spoken Irish. I'd genuinely be inclined to like edit some pages on Wikipedia, but it's interesting to like get a bit more au fait with templates and stuff like that if you want to cross populate like Irish articles or articles with an Irish interest, but that might be relevant on English Wikipedia, and then have to figure out like how to write a pronunciation. Most people wouldn't even like know how to write phonetics, let alone how to format that for Wikipedia. So
it is a specialized. There would be template pages for absolutely everything.
Yeah.
So if you're ever interested in, so a bit like we were talking about kind of conflict of interest. So there will be sub Wikipedia pages for, so if you're looking at kind of things that are related to policy area, it's always this Wikipedia colon, which means that it's not in the article main space, it's kind of in the Wikipedia documentation space. So you will find, kind of documentation on conflict of interest, on, on any policy that you can think of, on the biographies of living people, and there will be a full, there'll be this kind of in a nutshell, but then there'll be full documentation of what all of this means. But speaking about, I suppose, one of the last things we can talk about is inter-wiki links. So how other language Wikipedias interact with each other. So this is the article on Ranelagh. We'll go for a really neutral topic. And if we scroll down the side, we'll see here on the left, we have all of the languages in which this article exists. So we have Catalan, we have French, we have Scots Gaelic, we have Polish, and we do have Irish. So what these links will do is bring you to that language version of the article. So you can see on Wikipedia, it is but a stub. It's one line, unfortunately. And this little box, which is telling you, this is a stub about Ireland, you can help out by editing this page. But you can see it's pretty much laid out. There's something wrong at the moment with Wikipedia. Usually all of these tools are translated. The translation must have broken recently. I think there was an update that didn't. There's a bit of Berlicus floating around here, but generally the platform would be entirely in Irish, and it has all the same things. Like it has your main page, which is entirely in Irish. So you can see we have our 52,000, almost 53,000 articles in Irish. If you do speak or can write in a minority language, you will find that there's there's way more that you can obviously contribute to a small language Wikipedia than you can do to English. You can do fantastic work on English, but if you're interested in writing articles, getting them onto a minority language Wikipedia, if you have those skills, you can make an absolutely massive impact.
Are you restricted to using references that are in those minority languages?
Not necessarily. Most language Wikipedias will preference material coming from their own language, but not exclusively. So
it's just stuff like Ranelagh having like references in like Catalan. I just don't see. I don't see Ranelagh being talked about a lot in Catalan. I don't know. That might just be me.
Well,
or Russian. Oh, Russian maybe, because some communist person whose name I have long forgotten because I am a terrible person for theory, apparently like spoke English with a perfect like Rathmines accent because he learned his English in Ireland. So I could totally see someone in Russia making like a throwaway comment to like Rathmines or Ranelagh based on that.
So here you go. This is the Russian article, and you can see I'm mentioning earlier it's a global login. So I'm logged in no matter what language version of Wikipedia I go to. I can log in and edit with the same account. There is an interesting quirk. Doesn't seem to be playing out in this one, but most places will have an article in both Catalan and Swedish, because both of those Wikipedias have used an awful lot of bots to create articles, to create stubs.
Okay.
So there will be a kind of a placeholder, a bit like the Wikipedia one, on most localities, and it's because they've machine translated the first line, and maybe an info box similar to this one. And a lot of these, so how these are linked up together, if we go back to the English one, every article that you look at on Wikipedia has what's referred to as a wiki data item, and this is how you link articles together. So say if you're on Wikipedia, you create an article on, say, Christine Buckley, and you want it to then turn up in this box here. You go to the wiki data item. The wiki data item is the central, it's a linked database which links together objects that live across wiki projects. So what you'll find here is, it has a unique Q number, a unique identifier that is unique to Ranelagh. It tells you what it is. It is an instance of a human settlement. It links to the image of it. But right down the bottom, it'll tell you all the information. Right down the bottom, we'll have all of the languages.
Rebecca, would you mind just scrolling up there just so I can get a screenshot of it from Twitter?
Oh,
the top page, yeah. Sorry. No screenshots up. Where is it? No. Perfect. Thank you.
So it means that, you know, there's a unique identifier for everything. So for every person, everything, every place, you know, it could be a river, it could be a, you know, it could be a concept. It equally can be a journal article. Can have a unique identifier on Wikipedia. It's linked, you can see, to the Commons category, which is Wikimedia Commons, where all of the images on Ranelagh. So it's really, you know, it's a central hub to link to all the other Wikimedia projects that have content relating to it. So say if I had written, you know, the new article, there isn't one in German. So say I created one, what I would do here is I would edit this. I should be logged in, but I'm not. But you put in your language code, so DE would be German. And if I had created the article, I could just add the title of it here. So if you're on Wikipage or Welsh Wikipedia or whatever it is, and you've created a new article and you want to link it to the other language versions, this is where you would do it. So it's quite a nice, it's a massive upgrade from the previous system that they used to be. There is a nice...
Have you found that the system has changed over the last, like, what are big trends you've seen in making Wikipedia perhaps a bit more accessible and a bit more integrated over time?
Well, visual editor was the massive one.
Okay.
Because previously you had no option but to use source. And one of the things that visual editor is the default on some other language Wikipedias. It's not on English. You have to select it, which was a hard-fought concession. There was an awful lot of Wikipedia editors on English that did not want visual editor at all. They felt it diluted the platform, that was going to be easier to vandalize, you know, get the huddled masses in.
Yes, Puritans, the lot of them.
Yes, and also the thing of, well, I learned it this way, so everybody else should have to. You know, you know, pain, transferal of pain.
Imagine making the world a bit more accessible for other people.
We cannot make things easier. We're not here to make
radical idea, I know.
So that's the main one. And then I think Wikidata has been the thing that's really revolutionized that ability to and Wikidata is I think it's the youngest, I'm pretty sure it's the youngest wiki project. It's 5 years old now, I think, and came out of Wikimedia Deutschland. And if anybody's interested in coding and things like that, or databases or linked data, it's a Sparkle database, so you can run Sparkle queries. So some of the other wiki projects that we were kind of mentioning, so Wiki Women in Red is a big one, and what it can be used to do is to generate lists of biographies that are missing. So all of the red lists in this project are most of them are generated from Wikidata. So what it does is it pings Wikidata and it looks for objects that are tagged as being a woman and from, say, a specific area, so are tagged as being from Ireland. So if we go to, that's occupation and geography. So say if we go to, actually we don't have to pick Ireland, we'll pick Ghana. So this is the Wikidata list that gets automatically updated, and what it's doing is it's drawing in every person on Wikidata that's marked as being from Ghana and being a woman and doesn't have an article on English language Wikipedia. So it automatically creates these red lists for you. So they are, you can look at these lists based on geography, but also on subject area. So there's probably going to be a list of just badminton players. There's always badminton players in these lists. I don't know why. There's probably a database.
I'm a badminton player. I don't know offense at that. I don't know. I feel like I should.
But you can see it just, you know, populates. So somebody doesn't have to manually create this list.
Yeah.
And as people are added to Wikidata, this list will then be updated. And equally, as articles are created, people will be removed from this list. So it's quite a neat system. And it takes an awful lot of the drudge work out of running events, you know, and pointing people towards some of the big gaps on Wikipedia. Somebody has left me a message. So when you're logged in, you can see somebody's talking to me. So my little bell icon there. If somebody leaves a message on your talk page, that's where you'll get the little ping about it. I'm going to have to go away and create this article. for my dinner. So just to say, when you've created an article in your sandbox, if you're a brand new editor, what you will probably have is a dialog box, the very top of this page saying, do you want to submit this draft for review? So as a brand new editor, if you have less than 15 to 20 edits, you can't create an article straight up to main space Wikipedia. You have to create it in your sandbox and then either have somebody move it for you or have it reviewed in this way. And the system that it goes through is articles for creation. It's not a particularly, new editors can find it a very challenging system. The review that you get back can be filled with acronyms that don't necessarily make an awful lot of sense to you. The feedback can be quite sparse. The people who are doing the reviewing don't tend to spend an awful lot of time kind of hand-holding or helping you get your article onto the main space. So if you are wanting to create an article that doesn't exist and you are a brand new editor, what I would really suggest to you, a bit like what Alice was referring to, like people getting back in touch with her saying, I've created this draft, can you take a look at it? Ping somebody like myself or Alice. If you go to the dashboard, we're both here as users. So I'm Smirky Beck and Alice is Zero Monk. You can contact us through Wikipedia. You can on our talk pages. So if you click through here, it'll eventually. Equally, if you're on Wikipedia, if you just put in user Smirky Beck, it'll bring you to my user page, and you can leave a message either on my talk page or you can email this user down here. My email address is attached to my is activated on my user account, and it means that I will get an email with your message. Equally, if you've added your email address to your Wikipedia account, other people can email you. They will not see your email address unless you reply. So it doesn't release your email address into the wild. If somebody sends you a message and you don't want to interact with them, they will never know your email address unless you reply to them. And you will get an email kind of saying, you know, user such and such has contacted you via the email function. And then you can reply to that if you want to. But if you're starting a draft and you want somebody that you're familiar with to take a look at it in a very benign way, myself and Alice are definitely, I'm from an Irish context, I'm definitely happy to take a look at it. And what we can do then is, for you, we can publish into main space. We can move that article once it's at the stage where it's ready to go onto Wikipedia. We can publish it for you.
Yeah, and I would say also before that, if there is feedback, you know, that we can absolutely tell you, you know, talk you through what another reviewer would say, and make recommendations about citations or style. Yeah, I'm very happy to review articles. I am one of the reviewers who does articles for creation, so if you do send it off into the ether, I might get a chance to look at it, but as you can imagine, there's a lot of randomness in that in that system, the peer review system. So
I think that's a really nice that's a really nice bit of reassurance to have, like, for me and anybody else who's like actually watching and, you know, hopefully going to go away and look at some of the articles we've recommended. So many creators that I still have to like add to that list to recommend as well. It's kind of reassuring because I think as a person who's cited in the media and as somebody who like works with a lot of people who don't feel seen, one of the things you get very often is like, you know, people saying, oh no, but there isn't like an objective record. Like, why does it matter that you're called a certain way by certain people? You know, why does it matter that like you weren't represented? Why can't you just, you know, talk to people privately and things will get sorted out? Why do you have to like talk to people publicly and make a point of it? Certainly in this way, it's actually kind of the reverse, where by showing public support and openness to like, you know, be contacted on a platform like this, by showing public support and saying, you know, like, I will help if you want to do those things, it means that it kind of reduces the barrier to entry for when people want to make edits. Like, you don't have to feel like, you know, I have to hop in your DMs to do that. You're quite openly like, please do hop in my DMs. And that first step makes a difference, because that first step is not something a lot of people do. Like, certainly in journalism, like we started out talking about how, you know, Google is populated with people who cite you and don't ask for your permission. And then it's populated with people who do ask for your permission, you know, do profit of the work you do on profiling it, but couldn't like have the cop on to get your name right and similar things like that. In this case, it's, you know, people who don't profit are doing an act of good digital citizenship, as you said, but also people who are willing to pass that forward, and there isn't like a fear barrier of approaching people, and, you know, willing to share even like how to parse reviewers' edits, how to parse what is fair and what is unfair.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know about you, Rebecca, but it's one of my favorite parts of what I do. The sheer joy of being able to say to someone, congratulations, you have made the internet more diverse. You've added something, you have finished a page that is, you know, ready to be live, ready for everyone to look at. This is great. It's the best feeling. Getting to say that to someone, like that congratulations moment, gives me such a buzz.
I'm gonna need to like word for word need you to repeat that so I can put that up on Twitter, because I think it's really important to have visible mentors. Like, the best mentors I've ever had in my life are people who have, I don't know, maybe it's just a weird me thing, but the best mentors I've had are people who have not lived the life of underrepresentation I've had, but like have reached out that hand specifically from the perspective of being like, oh, go you did a thing that I knew you could do anyway. Like, there you are. But it's just so nice to hear sometimes that, you know, you've made a difference. And it's lovely to have mentors who look out for you and are willing to extend that experience.
And I have to say, Twitter is really great for that. Wiki Women in Red are really good at amplifying the edits that people are making and tweeting at them. And also, as Alice was saying, like tweeting at people, kind of saying, you know, could you upload an image of yourself, or could your institution, you know, relicense the really nice headshot of you? And you know, there's kind of a few stalwarts of that community. So like Rosie, I only know him by iPigot, his username. I can't think of his real name off the top of my head. Who will always do the work of kind of, you know, adding some of the infrastructure type stuff that as a newbie is really difficult to know to do, like the wiki project stuff, and, you know, kind of templates and the really kind of fiddly bits that as a brand new editor you're just not going to get your head around in the first sitting. But they'll do that kind of twiddly kind of donkey work to make sure that the article is doing everything, you know, singing and shouting and doing all the things that a Wikipedia article should do and looks the way that it should do. Mm-hmm. And do some of that kind of just boring kind of, you know, templatey type stuff. And they are fantastic in answering questions. So there's a talk page on the Women in Red wiki project. So if you are, you know, struggling with a draft, it doesn't always have to be you know, an individual that you know that is a mentor. There are those spaces as well, and you can contact them through social media as well, definitely.
Yeah, and tweeting at Wikimedia Ireland or Wikimedia UK, like those places is a great place. Jess Wade, I don't know when she sleeps, but she is a great person at amplifying and at answering questions about how things work. So yeah, do reach out. There is an increasingly large community of folks who really want to make it as easy as possible for new people to get involved in editing, and to sort of, yeah, to make it a more open and easy to understand process of how everything works on there.
I feel really sad that like the website doesn't seem to acknowledge that I made an edit. Like, that feels kind of like a personal slight. Oh no, it does. Okay, no, it does. It's fine. It's all good.
So just over the course of this session, more than 4,000 words have been added and 45 references.
Yeah, like I'm currently, you know, doing screenshots and stuff so that I can be like, oh, this is the difference we made. But wow, it's quite a difference we've made.
Yeah, and as of tomorrow, this dashboard will start telling us, counting up how many times people view those pages.
Amazing.
So yeah,
It's
always way more than any academic articles you will ever write in your life. It's really exciting.
Well, and certainly any that like I will write that don't just end up on my floor the whole time because executive dysfunction is so real.
So I think
I actually made a difference that someone might see for once.
I think we're coming up to the end of our session. Is there any concluding remarks that anyone wants to contribute?
I mean, like, I'll definitely like happily do a roundup and say thank yous because I feel like I've learned a lot. But if you guys have anything you want to say, I'll let you go first.
Just thank you for joining in. Thank you for editing, and please genuinely do get in touch if there are any questions that we can help with, if there's anything that we can do to support editing, because it's great. It's a joyous thing to be involved in. And thank you for doing the introduction and talking about your experiences and everything today. That was fantastic. So thank you all.
No worries. Oh, do we have Rebecca still? Oh God,
Yeah.
my screen. Oh, you're still there.
Your screen is misbehaving. Yeah, no, thanks everybody for taking part, and it's fantastic. That's the beauty of the dashboard. It gives you those metrics that, you know, you're not just talking out into the ether. There are people out there, and they're, you know, doing the hard work. You know, some edits on Wikipedia are really easy, but then, you know, it's not. It does take, you know, that little bit of cognitive surplus. So you are definitely paying it forward. And thank you for all of that work that you've done. And I would really repeat again that it, you know, I feel that it's a form of allyship that can be really meaningful. You know, especially if you feel quite disempowered, especially, you know, you couldn't go to a protest because of the lockdown, or, you know, you feel like your voice is not the one that needs to be listened to right now. You can elevate other people's voices without centering yourself. And I think that's the beauty of Wikipedia, that you can bring forward voices without ever, and, you know, you're not going to do it perfectly, you know, especially when I'm writing about stuff from Ireland. I mean, writing about particular groups and using citations from RT and the Irish Times, the lens that you're provided with is not flawless.
Yeah.
But it is a start. And it means that there is something there for somebody else to work with, and maybe to bring in, you know, reinforce and bolster the diversity of it. But it's, you know, it's a great way, you know, invisible labor for people who have privilege. I think it's definitely something.
Ooh, that's going on my like last citation. I'm going to write that down before I close up, because I suppose you've really answered, I think, the bit that I found was missing with that when I first proposed this project. Because like for so much time we, you know, well, for all of history, we've been talking about how we don't see enough underrepresented people, you know, how the work of underrepresented people is often the pedestal on which literally the statues of privileged people are built. Like their backs are what it's built on. But I think you highlighted very, very clearly through your incredible contributions yourself and Alice today, and also your words right there, what it takes to make underrepresented people a little more visible. It takes, for people who have more resources, we've talked about, you know, Wikipedia being created by the resource rich and being accessed by the resource and time poor. It takes the people who have a lot to be very directly an invisible source of labor in a way that a lot of privileged people aren't used to being, and in a way that like a lot of activism and allyship doesn't see people being, because, you know, mass protest is always, how am I in a space, but not, the space isn't about me, but how do you navigate that? Like, this is a very tangible way on a global scale to let people be seen by just being in the shadows for once, but not doing nothing. This is going beyond the black square, Black Lives Matter in a very important way. And yeah, I hope that the ability to do that in some way is something that people have gleaned a little bit of from the Wikithon today. So yeah, thank you guys so much for your time. Thank you to Eve, Andy, Eamon, Ashing, everybody at the Science Gallery who has Grace as well, who's one of the people who coordinates the youth advisors, for talking to me about this project and like sort of, you know, niggling out those like blossoming shoots of an idea and actually like cultivating them into something that has gone on now for like nearly 4 hours that we've been online anyway. Thank you all of you for all of the organization required for this and all of the resources and all of your time. And yeah, thank you to everybody who's made an edit or has been here and inspired to make some edits and make the internet a little bit more open and a better space for people to navigate and see themselves in and see people they want to and can be in as well. So yeah, thanks guys. You're all great. You all get a star.